Most of the best desserts black families made in the 1960s were never written down. Pound cakes cooling on wire racks, sweet potato pies with that cracked top your auntie was proud of, banana pudding so tall the vanilla wafers were sliding off the side. In those kitchens, dessert was not something you grabbed from a store shelf. It was something somebody in the house made from memory, a recipe passed down without ever being put on paper. And most of those desserts have quietly disappeared. You will not find them at potlucks anymore. You will not see them at reunions the way you used to, but they deserve to come back. Number 19, blackberry cobbler. If you lived anywhere near a ditch, a fence line, or an empty lot in the rural South, you had access to blackberries. They grew wild, they cost nothing, and every black mother knew exactly what to do with them. The berries were washed, sugared, and poured into a baking dish. A simple batter of flour, sugar, milk, and melted butter went on top or underneath, depending on the family tradition. The oven did the rest. The fruit bubbled up through the batter and turned the whole thing into something that smelled like a summer afternoon in 1962. Children came home with purple-stained fingers and buckets full of berries, and their mothers turned those berries into dessert the same evening. There was no planning, there was no recipe card, there was just fruit that grew for free and a woman who knew what to do with it. That mattered. But blackberry cobbler was more than a free dessert. It was a thread that connected generations of black women to the land they lived on. Your grandmother picked berries from the same brambles her own mother had picked from decades earlier. The thorns scratched the same arms. The juice stained the same fingers. And when the cobbler came out of the oven, it carried a taste that no store-bought pie could touch because it came from a place, not a shelf. In a decade when a black family's grocery budget in the South averaged $12 a week, a dessert that cost nothing was not a luxury. It was a gift the land gave to the women who knew how to receive it. Nobody called them cookies. They were fried cakes, sweet rounds, or just them things mama makes, depending on the household. Fatback fried cookies use simple sugar cookie dough dropped into a skillet where rendered fatback, thick pork fat saved in coffee cans on every black Southern stove, served as the frying medium. The fatback gave them a faint, savory undertone that balanced the sweetness in a way butter never could, and that flavor separated the women who knew from those who guessed. The dough was mixed stiff, pinched small, flattened between palms, and fried until both sides turned deep gold, drained on brown paper bags and dusted with sugar while still warm. Through the 1950s and 60s, these showed up at Christmas, Easter, and on summer evenings when kids needed something sweet to chase with cold buttermilk. The tradition faded when vegetable shortening replaced fatback. The women who rendered their own fat are gone now, and so is everything they carried in the taste. Coconut snowball cookies appeared on black Christmas cookie platters like edible decorations, round butter cookies rolled in snowy white coconut that left sweet traces on children's fingers. The dough came together quickly, butter, sugar, flour, and vanilla, but the rolling technique required practice to achieve perfectly round balls that wouldn't flatten during baking. Fresh from the oven, while still warm, the cookies were rolled in sweetened coconut that clung to their surfaces like fresh fallen snow. Some mothers added finely chopped pecans to the dough for texture, while others kept the recipe pure and simple. The cookies traveled well, packed into tins that went to church gatherings, neighbor visits, and family reunions throughout the holiday season. Children counted how many snowballs remained in the cookie jar, negotiating with siblings for a fair share. The simplicity meant even young daughters could help, learning kitchen skills while creating memories that would outlast any single Christmas. Sweet potato pone was not a pie, not a cake, and not quite a pudding. It occupied its own category in the African American kitchen, and if you had grown up eating it, no other name was needed. This was one of the oldest desserts in the tradition, tracing its roots to West Africa, where yam-based sweets cooked in similar fashion, adapted in the American South. Once enslaved cooks began growing sweet potatoes in place of the yams they had known. The base was raw sweet potato grated by hand on the box grater, mixed with molasses, sugar, butter, eggs, and warm spice, then poured into a greased pan without any flour. The absence of flour was the point. What came out of the oven was dense and moist at the center, slightly caramelized at the edges, held together by egg and potato starch alone. She cut it into squares while still warm. The edges were the best part, darker than the center, almost candy sweet where the molasses had thickened against the hot pan. Nobody makes it like that anymore.
Prune cake was the deeply spiced Christmas cake that African American families made when dried plums were more affordable than fresh fruit. Stewed prunes were folded into a batter, rich with cinnamon, allspice, cloves, and nutmeg, creating a cake so dark and moist it seemed almost magical. The prunes provided natural sweetness and kept the cake tender for over a week, perfect for the marathon of holiday visiting. Black families often frosted prune cake with caramel or brown sugar icing, amplifying the deep flavors already present. Some versions included buttermilk for tang or black walnuts for crunch. The cake was substantial enough to anchor a dessert table, yet refined enough to serve to the preacher when he came calling. Prune cake represented the ingenuity of making celebration from what was available, turning an unfashionable fruit into something genuinely delicious. Those who remember it recall its complex spice and satisfying density with real affection.
Sliced bananas and cream appeared in bowls across Black households whenever ripe bananas sat on the counter and something sweet was needed fast. Mothers sliced bananas into rounds, covered them with heavy cream or evaporated milk, and sprinkled sugar over everything until the fruit glistened. The cream softened the banana slightly, while the sugar dissolved into sweet pools that collected at the bottom of the bowl. Children ate this for breakfast, after school, and as late-night snacks, the combination simple enough for anyone to prepare. Some mothers added a dash of vanilla extract or a sprinkle of nutmeg to elevate the humble ingredients. The dessert required no cooking and came together in less than 2 minutes, making it perfect for satisfying sudden sweet cravings.
Sweet potato biscuits with cane syrup were African American Christmas breakfast transformed into dessert. Tender biscuits made golden with mashed sweet potato. The biscuits were mixed by hand, sweet potato, mashed smooth, and folded into flour, butter, and buttermilk until dough came together. Cut thick and baked until risen and golden, they emerged fragrant with natural sweetness. Cane syrup was poured over warm biscuits, pooling in crevices and soaking into tender crumb. The combination was both breakfast and dessert, served Christmas morning or after evening meals when something sweet but light was wanted. Families who made their own cane syrup treasured it, knowing each batch carried subtle differences. Children loved these biscuits, the sweetness satisfying without overwhelming. Sweet potato biscuits represented resourcefulness, stretching breakfast staples into celebration. This tradition has faded as cane syrup became rare.
Chocolate meringue pie was the kind of special occasion dessert that made the entire reunion crowd stop and stare when someone carried it across the yard. The chocolate filling was rich, smooth, and deeply comforting, cooked on the stove until it thickened into a glossy pudding-like consistency that tasted indulgent even before it reached the crust. She poured the warm filling into a baked shell, letting it settle before turning her attention to the meringue. Egg whites, sugar, and patience whipped together into tall, shining peaks that curled at the tips like soft white flames. She spread the meringue high across the top, making sure it touched the crust so it would not shrink, then baked it until the peaks turned golden brown. When the pie cooled, the meringue stood proudly above the chocolate layer, like a cloud sitting on a dark horizon. Every slice was a balance of silky chocolate crisp crust and airy sweetness. It was a pie meant for sharing, meant for showing off, and meant for making memories at the reunion dessert table.
Pineapple icebox cake belonged to a time before air conditioning, when the oven was the enemy and the refrigerator did all the work. Vanilla wafers or graham crackers were layered with a filling made from canned crushed pineapple, whipped cream or Cool Whip, and sometimes lemon gelatin or vanilla pudding. The assembled cake went into the icebox overnight, and by morning the wafers had softened into something between cake and custard, the pineapple juice seeping through every layer until the whole thing cut like a terrine. The name itself was a relic. Icebox predated refrigerator in common speech, and the women who used it had grown up with actual ice boxes, heavy wooden cabinets cooled by blocks of ice delivered weekly. By the 1960s, electric refrigerators were standard, but the name stuck because the cake stuck. It showed up at summer gatherings, wrapped in foil, already sliced, already vanishing.
Molasses apple dumplings were small bundles of joy wrapped in dough and baked in bubbling syrup. Whole apples were peeled, cored, and stuffed with brown sugar and spice, then folded into pastry made from the simplest ingredients: flour, lard, and a pinch of hope. As they baked, the molasses caramelized into a thick, sticky sauce that clung to the edges like honey. The scent alone could fill a home with warmth, even when winter winds pressed hard against the walls. Families made them during harvest season, a celebration of labor and reward, of fruit gathered and shared. They were sweet, tart, and heavy with meaning, the taste of both work and rest. The sauce was spooned over each dumpling as it came out of the oven, pooling into a dark, glossy sweetness that felt like abundance. Each bite melted between the teeth, soft and fragrant, carrying traces of cinnamon and smoke. Served with milk or cream if one was lucky, these dumplings carried comfort through generations. In their syrupy folds lived the story of people who refused to let hardship steal the sweetness from their table, who baked hope into every humble crust. Apple brown. Betty was one of those clever desserts that turned scraps into comfort, layering sliced apples with breadcrumbs, sugar, and warm spices. African-American families often relied on it when ingredients were limited, making use of leftover bread that would have otherwise gone stale. Butter or drippings were dotted between the layers, and as it baked, the crumbs soaked up the spiced juices from the apples. The smell alone filled kitchens with a sense of warmth and home. It was a dish that could be prepared quickly, yet it always tasted like something special. Children loved it because it was sweet and soft, while adults valued it for its thrift and practicality. Often baked in cast-iron skillets, it carried the rustic charm of resourceful kitchens where nothing was wasted. It was served warm, sometimes with milk or cream poured over, stretching a few apples into dessert for the whole family. Though it rarely appears today, Apple Brown Betty was once a reminder of how ingenuity created lasting memories. Beaten biscuits with molasses drizzle were a Southern staple, though they were as much dessert as they were bread. Beaten biscuits required hard work, pounded by hand until the dough was smooth and tight, then baked into firm rounds. When drizzled with molasses, they became sweet and filling, perfect for a quick after-supper treat. Families often used them during the Civil Rights era when time was short, but a little sweetness was still desired. They traveled well, which made them popular to pack for marches, picnics, or school lunches. Molasses was cheap, plentiful, and added a depth of flavor that made these biscuits taste special without extra cost. They represented the resourcefulness of households that turned something simple into something memorable. At church events, trays of beaten biscuits with molasses drizzle would disappear quickly, leaving sticky fingers and satisfied smiles behind. This dessert stood as a reminder of both effort and reward, tying communities together through the simplest acts of baking and sharing. Fatback fried cabbage was a simple, deeply satisfying dish that turned a humble head of cabbage into a flavorful side worth remembering. Fatback, A cured slab of pork fat with a rich, salty taste was diced and fried until it released its golden drippings. Into this savory base went shredded cabbage, sizzling as it hit the hot pan and slowly softening while soaking up all the flavor. The edges browned slightly, giving a hint of caramelization, while the tender leaves carried the smoky richness of the pork. This was a dish that needed no complicated seasoning, just salt, pepper, and sometimes a splash of vinegar to brighten the flavors. In African American kitchens, especially in the rural South, fatback fried cabbage was an easy way to feed a family, served alongside cornbread and beans or as part of a larger spread. It represented the practice of using every part of what was available, from the vegetables in the garden to the trimmings from a butchered hog. Today, while cabbage is still common, the tradition of frying it in fatback has faded, replaced by lighter cooking methods, but its flavor remains unforgettable to those who grew up eating it. Tomato aspic cups were one of the most surprising appetizers from mid-century gatherings, a dish that blended creativity, thrift, and formal presentation in a single wobbly bite made from seasoned tomato juice thickened with gelatin. The mixture was poured into tiny molds or muffin tins, where it set into bright red shapes that looked elegant on a platter. Families mixed in onion, celery, or peppers for texture, then served each chilled cup with a dollop of mayonnaise or a sprinkle of herbs. These cups appeared at formal community events, funerals, wedding receptions, and club meetings where people wanted to bring something that looked polished, even if it cost very little. They were tangy, savory, and refreshing in a way that feels unusual today, a flavor that older generations recognized instantly and younger ones rarely encountered. Over time, tomato aspic cups faded as gelatin salads drifted out of popularity, but they remain a powerful memory for anyone who grew up around mid-century gathering tables loaded with foods made to last through long afternoons. They were proof that creativity often came from necessity, and that even the simplest ingredients could be turned into something memorable with time and care. Sweet potato bites topped with mini marshmallows were dessert-like appetizers that blurred the line between side dish and treat, their orange flesh and white topping creating visual appeal that drew children like magnets before dinner was served. Mothers would bake sweet potatoes until soft, then scoop out the flesh and mash it with butter, brown sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and vanilla extract until smooth and creamy. The sweetened sweet potato mixture was spooned into mini muffin tins or shaped into small balls and placed on baking sheets, each one topped with a single mini marshmallow that would toast golden brown. As they baked, the marshmallows puffed up and turned golden, creating that characteristic toasted flavor that children associated with campfires and summer fun. In the 1970s Black households, these bites represented creativity, taking traditional candied yams and reimagining them as finger foods children could grab.
Number 14, lemon icebox pie. This was the summer dessert, the dessert your mother made when it was 95 degrees outside and turning on the oven would have made the house unbearable. A graham cracker crust pressed into a pie plate, a filling of sweetened condensed milk and fresh lemon juice, egg yolks whisked together until it thickened on its own from the acid in the lemons, meringue on top, browned under the broiler. Then the whole thing went into the icebox to set. By dinner time, it was cold, tart, creamy, and perfect. In Black households across the South, where many homes didn't have air conditioning well into the 1960s, lemon icebox pie was not a preference, it was survival. A woman in Chattanooga named Jonita Solomon Miller grew up on this pie and said her mother never once measured a thing. She just knew. That pie was proof you didn't need an oven to make something your family would remember forever. Before donuts came in boxes, there were molasses, dough balls, small rounds of flour, egg, and dark molasses dropped by the spoonful into shimmering lard. They puffed golden and crisp outside while staying dense and chewy within, carrying the smoky sweetness only blackstrap molasses could give. During the Depression, when white sugar was beyond reach for most Black households in the rural South, Molasses kept dessert alive. A jar cost almost nothing and stretched further than anything in the pantry. Mothers in Alabama and Mississippi fried batches on Saturday afternoons, rolling the hot balls in whatever sugar they had. Sometimes brown, sometimes raw cane, sometimes nothing, because the molasses was sweet enough alone. Kids lined up at the stove with outstretched palms, burning fingers and not caring. What started as a way to make something from almost nothing became the treat kids begged for even when the pantry was full. Red velvet cake in the 1960s bore little resemblance to the bright crimson versions sold today. It was subtler, more sophisticated, and made with buttermilk that gave it genuine tang. African American mothers achieved the distinctive color through a chemical reaction between cocoa, buttermilk, and vinegar, creating a mahogany hue that deepened as it baked. The cream cheese frosting hadn't yet become standard. Instead, mothers made cooked flour frosting, called ermine frosting, that was silky, not too sweet, and required patience to perfect. Beating the mixture until peaks formed took arm strength that modern stand mixers cannot replicate. The cake appeared at Christmas dinners in gleaming cake stands, its color suggesting festivity without artificial dyes. Children knew that red velvet meant celebration, that its appearance on the table signaled a special occasion worth remembering. The recipe traveled through church cookbooks and handwritten cards, each family adding small variations that made their version unique and deeply personal. Before the canning shelf ran out in February, there was always at least one jar of applesauce left, and that jar became the applesauce spice cake. Not a substitute, but a recipe that made the fresh apple version seem unnecessary. This cake traced its American roots to colonial kitchens where applesauce replaced fat in the batter during times of scarcity. African American families in the rural South kept the tradition alive because apple trees grew in the yard and what they put up in summer lasted through winter. She never measured the spices, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, allspice, only shook until the batter turned the right shade of brown. Raisins went in if there were raisins, walnuts if there were walnuts. The cake baked in a square pan, served plain, never frosted. It tasted better the second day and better still the third, as the spices deepened and the crumb tightened into something close to what she had intended all along.
Ambrosia was the fruit salad that African American families served at Christmas when fresh fruit was a rare and precious luxury in the winter South. This wasn't the heavy, mayonnaise-laden version that came later. Traditional ambrosia was simply fresh oranges, shredded coconut, and perhaps a sprinkle of sugar, layered in glass bowls that showed off its beauty. Black families would wait for Christmas oranges to arrive, peeling them carefully and removing every bit of white pith. Fresh coconut was grated by hand, the white shreds mixing with the bright citrus like snowflakes on sunshine. Some added maraschino cherries for color or pineapple for sweetness, but purists insisted on keeping it simple. Ambrosia was served cold, often in the family's best crystal bowl, positioned among the heavier desserts. The name meant food of the gods, and for families who rarely saw fresh fruit in December, it truly was divine. Ambrosia was celebration in a bowl, a reminder that the freshest ingredients needed nothing more than each other.
Instant chocolate pudding revolutionized weeknight desserts in Black households during the 1960s, transforming 3 minutes of whisking into creamy satisfaction. Mothers poured the powder into cold milk, beat it with a hand mixer or whisk until thick, then spooned it into cups for eager children who could barely wait for it to set. The pudding could be eaten immediately while still soft or chilled until firm, depending on how patient the family felt. Some mothers topped it with Cool Whip, vanilla wafers, or crushed peanuts for texture. The convenience was revolutionary, allowing working mothers to provide homemade tasting dessert without spending precious evening hours in the kitchen. Children grew up believing their mothers made the best pudding, never realizing the magic came from a small box.
Fruit cocktail cake was 1960s African-American Christmas convenience transformed into something beloved, using canned fruit cocktail as both flavoring and moistening agent. The cake came together quickly: flour, sugar, eggs, an entire can of fruit cocktail with syrup stirred into batter. Some versions added coconut or nuts, while others kept it simple, letting fruit provide interest and sweetness. The cake baked into something dense and moist, fruit pieces suspended like jewels in golden crumb. A brown sugar and butter topping was often poured over warm cake, creating caramelized edges. Families appreciated that this required no creaming of butter, no separating of eggs, just mixing and baking. It was practical for busy holiday seasons when elaborate desserts demanded attention. Children loved finding fruit pieces in their slices, especially bright red cherries. Fruit cocktail cake has largely disappeared as canned fruit fell from fashion, though those who remember it recall its honest sweetness fondly.
Cane top syrup began with the earliest shoots of sugarcane, long before the full harvest. When planters reserved the mature stalks for commercial sugar, enslaved workers cut the tender tops and simmered them slowly, extracting a thin but sweet syrup. This homemade sweetener flavored cornbread, porridge, and hot drinks, adding a rare touch of luxury to daily meals. The technique reflected both African experience with cane and Caribbean methods of small-batch syrup making. After emancipation, many rural families continued to boil cane juice into syrup during the early season, a practice still alive in parts of Louisiana and Florida. The flavor is lighter and grassier than late-season molasses, making it unique among Southern sweeteners. Cane top syrup shows how skilled hands transformed what might have been discarded into something valuable, blending cultural knowledge with the natural rhythms of the crop. It stands as a reminder that, even in conditions of deprivation, African-American cooks created enduring regional flavors that remain treasured in Southern pantries today.
Wacky cake needed no eggs, no milk, no butter, just flour, sugar, cocoa, salt, baking soda, vegetable oil, vinegar, vanilla, and water. That was the recipe, born during wartime rationing when dairy and eggs were scarce, and it survived decades past the war because it was cheap, fast, and foolproof. You didn't even need a mixing bowl. The dry ingredients went straight into the baking pan, a 9 by 13 or an 8-inch square, and 3 wheels were pressed into the surface with the back of a spoon, oil in one, vinegar in another, vanilla in the third. Water poured over everything, stirred right there in the pan with a fork until the batter went smooth. The vinegar and baking soda reacted to give it lift, and the oil kept it moist without butter. It came out dark, tender, and honest, not as rich as a traditional chocolate cake, but satisfying in a way that had nothing to do with ingredients and everything to do with the fact that your mother made it from nothing, and nothing never tasted that good by accident.
Parched corn candy was a small, sweet treasure crafted from the same grain that fed the body and the spirit. Roasted corn kernels were ground fine, mixed with honey or molasses, and pressed into sticky rounds that hardened as they cooled. They were both candy and sustenance, pocket-sized energy for the weary and a rare treat for children. The flavor was smoky and sweet, a reminder of the fields that gave both labor and life. These candies were made during quiet evenings by the fire, when laughter mixed with the scent of roasted corn and syrup. Every piece was hand-shaped and precious, because sweetness was a luxury few could afford. Yet in those moments, sweetness was not just taste, it was resistance. Parched corn candy was proof that joy could be made even when the world refused to give it freely. Transparent pie was a specialty that once filled Black Southern kitchens, a simple but striking dessert with a history tied to Kentucky roots. Made from butter, eggs, sugar, and cream, it created a clear, custard-like filling that shone under its golden crust. African American families made it for gatherings and church suppers, where its sweetness satisfied without the need for expensive ingredients. The pie's simplicity made it accessible, but its glossy, translucent center gave it a touch of elegance that set it apart. It was a recipe passed down through generations, often remembered only by those who grew up watching their elders whisk the filling together. Transparent pie carried the essence of thrift, turning staples into something that looked far more impressive than it cost. Its taste was rich, smooth, and satisfying, a blend of creaminess and sweetness that lingered long after the last bite. Though it has nearly vanished from modern cookbooks and tables, transparent pie remains one of those hidden gems of the past. Remembering it is like opening a window into kitchens where cleverness and tradition created desserts that truly stood the test of time. Carrot cake with cream cheese frosting became a signature dessert of the 1960s when home cooks began experimenting with vegetables in sweet recipes. The grated carrots added moisture and a subtle sweetness, while cream cheese frosting balanced it with tang. This cake gained popularity quickly because it used ingredients that were affordable and easy to find while still looking impressive at church potlucks or community gatherings. Families passed the recipe around in handwritten booklets, and soon carrot cake was a shared memory across neighborhoods. During the Civil Rights era, baking carrot cake was also a way of showing pride in creativity, proving that even simple ingredients could create something elegant. Slices of it often appeared at social meetings where people gathered to share food and strengthen unity. The thick frosting gave it a celebratory feel even when times were hard. Carrot cake carried both practicality and joy, making it one of the forgotten desserts that deserves to be remembered for its role in bringing people together. Ash-cooked sweet potatoes were a simple yet unforgettable treat. Whole sweet potatoes were nestled directly into the hot ashes of a wood-burning fireplace or outdoor fire pit, slowly roasting until their skins blackened and their insides caramelized. The result was a soft, smoky sweetness that needed no sugar or butter to shine. In African American households, especially in rural areas without modern ovens, this method was both practical and flavorful. The smell of roasting sweet potatoes would fill the air, drawing children and adults alike to the hearth. Once cooked, they could be split open and eaten right from the skin, often as a snack on cold evenings. This was food tied to patience and tradition, a reminder that sometimes the simplest preparations yield the richest flavors. Today, with most cooking moved indoors and convenience foods replacing old methods, ash-cooked sweet potatoes are rarely made, but for those who tasted them, they remain unmatched. Stuffed celery with pimento cheese was the bright, crunchy appetizer that lit up party tables with its color alone. Families mixed homemade pimento cheese with just the right balance of sharpness and creaminess, then pressed it into chilled celery sticks that snapped clean with each bite. These appetizers were refreshing, rich, and easy to hold while mingling. They showed up at card parties, club meetings, family gatherings, and Sunday socials where people wanted something small but flavorful. The celery offered a cool, crisp contrast to the warm tang of the cheese, creating a balance that felt playful and satisfying. As store-bought dips replaced homemade spreads, stuffed celery slowly disappeared. But one bite was enough to bring back the memory of bright kitchens, lace-covered tables, and laughter moving through crowded rooms. Chicken salad stuffed in cherry tomatoes created colorful, bite-sized portions that children eagerly grabbed. The cool, creamy chicken salad contrasting with the fresh, slightly tart tomato cups that held everything together. Aunties would hollow out cherry tomatoes using small spoons or melon ballers, creating little edible bowls that were functional and beautiful when arranged on serving platters. The chicken salad was made from finely chopped cooked chicken mixed with mayonnaise, diced celery, sweet pickle relish, and seasonings. The mixture kept cold until serving time. Each hollowed tomato was filled with a generous spoonful of chicken salad, mounded slightly on top for visual appeal. In 1970s Black households, these stuffed tomatoes represented creativity and presentation, transforming simple ingredients into appetizers that looked impressive enough for special occasions. Children loved them because they were perfectly portioned, colorful, and combined familiar flavors in a fun format.
Number 24, banana pudding. There was a time when banana pudding showed up at every church supper, every family reunion, and every repast in the Black community. The kind your mother made in a glass baking dish with layers of Nilla wafers. Sliced bananas, homemade vanilla custard cooked on the stove, and meringue browned in the oven. The Nabisco Company started printing a banana pudding recipe on its box in the 1940s. But Black mothers had been making their own versions long before that. The custard was cooked slowly on a low flame, stirred constantly so it would not scorch. A single pan fed 20 people at a church picnic and cost less than $1. In your grandmother's kitchen, banana pudding was not a recipe, it was a language. It said, "Welcome home." It said, "Happy birthday," without needing a single candle. Cornmeal fried cakes did not come from a recipe book. They came from watching, standing close enough to feel the heat while someone older stirred cornmeal into sweetened batter and dropped it by the handful into smoking lard. You poured until the batter looked right, cracked the egg without counting, added sugar until you tasted it off your fingertip. These were the original donuts of rural Black kitchens. No yeast, no rising time, no special pan. The cakes fried up with a gritty golden crust and a tender center that tasted like cornbread, and cake agreed on something sweet. Across the Mississippi Delta, cornmeal never ran out, making these the dessert that survived every lean month and every empty shelf. The women who fried them could finish a dozen without burning one, hands steady in the smoke. Coconut custard pie brought tropical richness to 1960s Black Christmas tables, its filling studded with sweetened coconut that toasted golden on top during baking. The custard base was simple: eggs, sugar, milk, vanilla, but the coconut transformed it into something exotic. Mothers used bagged sweetened coconut from grocery stores or fresh coconuts cracked and grated by hand for deeper flavor. The pie was poured into unbaked crust and baked slowly, allowing the custard to set while the coconut on top turned crispy and caramelized. Each slice revealed layers of texture: flaky crust, creamy custard, chewy coconut throughout, crispy coconut on top. The pie appeared at church potlucks, where it always disappeared quickly, at family dinners where children fought over corner pieces. Coconut custard pie represented accessible luxury, making Christmas feel special without requiring expensive ingredients. The recipe traveled through handwritten cards and church cookbooks, each family adding variations that made their version distinct. Brown sugar icebox cookies were the easiest thing in the refrigerator to explain to a child and the hardest to resist. A roll of dough wrapped in wax paper, chilled overnight, and sliced thin in the morning before the oven was fully hot. This was the church cookie exchange staple of the 1950s and 60s, the dessert that traveled well, held for days, and could be made ahead when the holiday kitchen was already running at full capacity. The dough was simple: butter, brown sugar, egg, flour, a pinch of salt, and a splash of vanilla, rolled into a log and chilled until firm enough to slice into perfect rounds that held their shape without spreading. What made them distinctive was the deep, almost caramel flavor of the brown sugar itself, deeper and more complex than white sugar ever produced in a cookie. She made the dough on Wednesday, sliced and baked on Saturday, and by Sunday afternoon at the church potluck, the plate came home empty. The recipe lived in no book. It lived in the muscle memory of a hand that had made it so many times it no longer required thought.
Molasses taffy was Christmas entertainment disguised as candy, a sticky pulled confection that turned entire African American families into taffy pulling teams on cold December evenings. The process began with boiling molasses, sugar, and butter until it reached the hardball stage, then pouring the hot mixture onto buttered platters to cool. Once it could be handled, the real fun began. Everyone would butter their hands and start pulling, stretching the dark mass until it lightened in color and developed that signature chewy texture. Children loved the mess, the laughter, and the competition to see who could pull the longest strand. The finished taffy was cut into pieces and wrapped in wax paper, stored in jars for the holiday season. This wasn't just candy, it was family bonding, a Christmas Eve tradition that created memories alongside sweets. Molasses taffy represented the old ways of doing things, when entertainment came from working together rather than watching screens.
Cool Whip fruit salad was the potluck staple that Black mothers carried to every gathering, its creamy sweetness hiding an assembly time of mere minutes. Canned fruit cocktail or mandarin oranges were drained and folded into Cool Whip, along with miniature marshmallows and sometimes shredded coconut. The mixture was stirred together in a large bowl, chilled briefly, and emerged looking like a complicated dessert that took real effort. Children loved the combination of fluffy cream, chewy marshmallows, and sweet fruit pieces in every spoonful. Mothers appreciated that it could be made the night before without separating or wilting, staying perfect until serving time. The dessert stretched to feed crowds. A single tub of Cool Whip transformed into enough sweetness for a dozen people or more.
Smoked oysters on crackers with hot sauce were adventurous bites that curious children tried. The smoky, briny oysters creating complex flavors that divided people into lovers and haters with no middle ground. Fathers would open tins of smoked oysters packed in oil, arranging them on serving platters surrounded by crackers and providing small bottles of hot sauce for those who wanted extra heat. The oysters had a strong, distinctive flavor, smoky from the curing process and intensely oceanic. Each oyster was placed on a cracker, sometimes with a tiny drop of hot sauce, creating bite-sized portions that delivered maximum flavor. In 1970s, Black household smoked oysters represented coastal sophistication and culinary bravery, appetizers that showed guests the host was willing to serve bold, distinctive foods. Children who tried smoked oysters either loved them immediately or swore them off forever, the strong flavor creating lasting memories. Pineapple upside-down cake was the reunion dessert that sparkled with color and nostalgia, arriving in a well-seasoned pan lined with rings of pineapple and bright red cherries glowing like jewels beneath a caramel-like glaze. The batter was poured gently over the fruit, creating a soft cushion that baked into a moist golden layer, soaking up all the sweet syrup that bubbled beneath it. When the pan was flipped onto a plate, the cake revealed its glossy crown of fruit arranged in perfect circles, each slice holding a piece of pineapple nestled around a cherry that tasted like childhood summers. Families loved it because it was affordable, cheerful, and dependable, always turning out beautiful, no matter how crowded or warm the kitchen became during reunion cooking. The cake itself stayed tender and sweet, and the fruity topping made every bite feel light, even though it carried a richness from the brown sugar glaze. Pineapple upside-down cake added color to the dessert table and reminded everyone of potlucks, church suppers, and afternoons when cousins shared slices under trees while the adults talked nearby.
Poke cake arrived in 1969 when Kraft printed the recipe on the back of Jell-O boxes, and within a year, it had colonized every church social and potluck supper in the country. You baked a white or yellow cake from a box, let it cool just enough to handle, then stabbed it all over with a fork. The deeper the holes, the more color would bleed through. Liquid Jell-O, still warm and not yet set, was poured slowly over the top and left to seep into every puncture. When the cake chilled and you sliced it, the inside was streaked with veins of bright red or green or orange, depending on the flavor. Cool Whip went on top to seal everything in. The kids didn't care about technique. They cared about the color. Strawberry jello turned the cake pink. Lime turned it almost alien. Cherry made it look like it was bleeding. At church functions, there were always at least 2 poke cakes on the dessert table, and the one that got eaten first was always the one with the wildest color.
Sweet grits porridge was the kind of comfort that could quiet an empty stomach and soothe a tired heart. Made from ground corn simmered slowly in milk or water. It was sweetened with molasses or sugar and sprinkled with nutmeg or cinnamon when available. Its texture was thick and creamy, somewhere between pudding and porridge, a warmth that filled the room as it cooked. Often eaten for breakfast but remembered as dessert, it was a reminder that sweetness did not require abundance. Children waited by the pot, hungry for the first spoonful, while elders stirred patiently, knowing good things took time. Sweet grits were nourishment for both body and soul, a soft echo of survival flavored with care. Sometimes a pat of butter was dropped in to melt, swirling gold through the creamy surface. The pot was scraped clean every time, not from hunger alone, but from gratitude. Even today, its simplicity endures, whispering that comfort does not come from riches. It comes from hands that know how to make enough feel like plenty, from people who turned a bowl of corn into memory. Jelly roll cake was once a showpiece dessert that brought a sense of elegance to African American households during special events. A thin sponge cake was baked, spread with homemade jam or jelly, and then carefully rolled into a spiral. When sliced, each piece revealed a swirl of color that made it look fancier than its simple ingredients suggested. Families often prepared it for birthdays, church socials, or Sunday dinners where presentation mattered as much as flavor. The rolling required skill, since the sponge could crack if not handled carefully, making it a dessert of both pride and patience. Homemade jams from summer fruits like blackberry or plum often filled the center, adding seasonal flavor. Children loved the slices because they looked almost too pretty to eat, while adults admired the careful work. Though jelly roll cakes have mostly disappeared from modern kitchens, they once represented creativity, thrift, and the joy of making something beautiful by hand. Its fading presence shows how desserts that once felt like artistry are often forgotten. Plum pudding with hard sauce was a Christmas tradition that crossed into church kitchens with a Southern twist. Made from dried fruits, spices, and breadcrumbs, it was steamed for hours until dense and fragrant. The hard sauce, a mixture of butter, sugar, and a splash of flavoring, melted over the top when served. During the Civil Rights era, plum pudding appeared at holiday gatherings where churches played a central role in uniting communities. It was a dessert of ceremony, rich in flavor and steeped in history. Families viewed it as both a special treat and a reminder of old-world traditions carried into new struggles. The process of making it required patience and planning, which made it a shared family project during the holidays. Its warmth and sweetness stood in contrast to the uncertainty of the times, reminding everyone that celebration was still possible. Plum pudding with hard sauce gave families a taste of continuity, memory, and togetherness when they needed it most. Sweet potato pie with brown sugar meringue crowned holiday tables with a beauty that matched its flavor. Smooth, mashed sweet potatoes blended with warm spices created a filling as rich as any custard, poured into a flaky handmade crust. The crowning touch was a cloud of meringue whipped with brown sugar until caramel-scented peaks formed and browned lightly in the oven. Families saved the first slice for honored guests or elders, a sign of respect and affection. The pie carried the sweetness of the southern soil and the skill of generations who knew how to stretch simple ingredients into celebration. Children licked the mixing bowls clean while parents watched the meringue rise, a shared moment of anticipation before the feast. Over time, commercial pies and instant mixes dulled the tradition, but those who remember the warm aroma of brown sugar meringue know that this dessert is more than food. It is a memory of family love, patient hands, and the quiet pride of homemade beauty. Pickle and cheese toothpick stacks were the humble heroes of potluck tables because they were cheap, quick, and strangely addictive. A slice of cheese, a slice of pickle, sometimes a tiny piece of lunch meat, all held together with a wooden toothpick. These little stacks showed up everywhere from card nights to school fairs because they took almost no time to prepare but always tasted better than expected. The sharpness of the pickle cut through the richness of the cheese, creating a flavor that was simple but surprisingly satisfying. Families made dozens in minutes, arranging them on mismatched plates where they never lasted long. They were not fancy, but they were part of a shared memory of community gatherings where everyone brought what they could. Over time, people stopped making them, choosing more modern snacks, but those simple stacks still hold a nostalgic charm. They were proof that even the most ordinary ingredients could bring joy. Cocktail meatballs simmered in grape jelly and chili sauce created sweet, savory bites that children couldn't resist, the glossy sauce coating each meatball like candy while delivering unexpected flavors. Mothers would brown frozen meatballs in skillets before transferring them to slow cookers or pots where they simmered in a mixture of grape jelly and bottled chili sauce that melted together into a thick, shiny glaze. The combination sounded strange but tasted magical, the grape jelly's sweetness balancing the chili sauce's tang and creating a flavor profile that kept people reaching for more. As the meatballs simmered, they absorbed the sauce and became tender, the exterior developing a sticky coating that made them perfect for spearing with toothpicks. In Black households during the 1970s, these cocktail meatballs represented easy elegance, a recipe that seemed fancy but required minimal effort. Children loved them because they were bite-sized, required no cutting, and tasted like a sweet, savory treat.
Number 22, tea cakes. These were not fancy, they were not decorated. They were simple, round, slightly sweet cookies that Black mothers baked by the dozen for Sunday visits, church picnics, and any afternoon when the children needed something before supper. Tea cakes date back to the 1700s, when enslaved people created their own version of European confections using the ingredients they had: flour, butter, sugar, eggs, vanilla, and a pinch of nutmeg. The recipes were never written down. They passed from mother to daughter by feel. You knew the dough was right when it felt like your grandmother's dough. A woman named Polly Ann Jackson in Tyler, Texas, made tea cakes her entire life and eventually started a business selling them. She used the same recipe her grandmother had used during Reconstruction. Tea cakes are one of the oldest desserts in Black American cooking, passed down generation after generation, and almost nobody under 40 makes them anymore. Sorghum syrup sopapillas came from where Black and Mexican cooking crossed paths, families sharing neighborhoods, church halls, and cast iron. The dough was basic: flour, baking powder, salt, lard worked by hand, but the frying made it rise. Hot oil at the right temperature ballooned it instead of flattening, creating a pocket that begged to be torn open. Black families poured sorghum syrup inside instead of honey, thick and dark, pressed from cane-like stalks across the South. It soaked into the warm shell and pooled in the center, turning each bite into crunch and liquid sweetness. At Juneteenth tables in East Texas during the 1950s, these sat alongside barbecue and red drink. When sorghum mills closed through the 70s, the sopapilla lost everything that tied it to those kitchens. Divinity candy represented the precarious magic of Christmas candy making, a fluffy white confection that could fail spectacularly if humidity crept too high or temperatures dropped wrong. African American mothers learned to read the weather before attempting divinity, choosing crisp, clear days when sugar syrup would behave properly. The process required pouring hot sugar syrup in thin streams into beaten egg whites, transforming the mixture into clouds of sweetness that held shape when dropped onto waxed paper. Pecans or walnuts studded each piece, adding crunch to the ethereal candy. Children watched the transformation with wonder, seeing how patience and skill could create something that looked like edible snow. Divinity was packed into tins and given as gifts, proof of a mother's dedication and expertise. The candy didn't keep long, which made it special. a Christmas-only treat that couldn't be replicated during humid summer months. Failed batches were never wasted, but spread on toast, teaching that even mistakes could nourish. Banana bread in the 1960s was not a weekend project. It was Tuesday morning when the bunch on the counter had gone too dark to eat, and throwing them away was not something that happened in that kitchen. Black families across the South and the urban North, still close to the rationing habits of the war years, treated overripe bananas as an ingredient, not a problem. The blackened fruit had converted its starch to sugar and carried a caramel-rich depth that no fresh banana could match. She mashed them with a fork, stirred in butter, eggs, flour, and a fistful of brown sugar. If there were walnuts in the cabinet, they went in. The brown, sugar glaze poured while the loaf was still hot made the top go glossy and cracked slightly as it cooled. The first slice was eaten standing at the counter before the loaf ever reached the table. Today, that same loaf sells for $8 in a coffee shop. Back then, it was what you made so nothing went to waste.
Syllabub was the elegant Christmas drink dessert that African-American families served in their finest glasses when company came calling during the holidays. This frothy mixture of cream, sugar, wine or sherry, and lemon juice was whipped until it held soft peaks, then spooned into cups where it slowly separated into cream on top and sweet liquid below. The name sounded fancy and the presentation impressed, but the recipe was simple enough for any cook to master. Black families learned syllabub from plantation kitchens and made it their own, sometimes substituting homemade wine or adding nutmeg for warmth. Guests would eat the cream with spoons, then drink the sweet wine that pooled beneath. 2 desserts in one. Syllabub required no baking, no special equipment, just good cream and patience with the whipping. It represented the kind of old-fashioned elegance that Christmas once demanded. A reminder that celebration meant elevating everyday ingredients into something worth savoring slowly.
Icebox cake required no baking and became the impressive dessert that Black mothers pulled out when company was coming. Chocolate wafer cookies were layered with sweetened whipped cream in a loaf shape, then refrigerated overnight until the cookies softened into cake-like layers. The transformation seemed like magic to children who watched hard cookies become sliceable dessert through nothing but time and cold air. Mothers assembled these after dinner, letting them set while the family slept, ready to slice and serve the next day. The dessert looked far more complicated than it was, earning compliments that belied its simple 5-minute assembly time. Some mothers used graham crackers instead of chocolate wafers, creating a different but equally satisfying version of this no-bake wonder.
Mincemeat pie carried British origins into African-American Christmas traditions, transformed by generations of Black cooks who made it their own. Traditional mincemeat combined chopped apples, raisins, currants, candied citrus, sweet and spices with brandy, aged in crocks for weeks. By the 1960s, most families used jarred mincemeat, but pies remained special, dense with fruit and spice, aromatic with brandy. The filling was spooned into flaky crusts, often topped with lettuce, showing off the dark, jeweled interior. Mincemeat pie was served in thin slices because its richness demanded restraint, often with hard sauce melting over warm filling. Elders who remembered homemade mincemeat spoke with reverence, describing chopping and stirring that filled kitchens with anticipation. The pie represented old world traditions adapted through generations of African American cooking. Mincemeat pie has nearly vanished as modern tastes find its dense richness unfamiliar and jarred versions disappeared from shelves.
Oatmeal raisin bars were the reunion dessert that traveled well sliced into sturdy squares that held together in warm weather and fed children quickly without fuss. She mixed oats, flour, butter, eggs, sugar raisins, and a touch of spice into a thick batter that baked into golden, chewy bars with crisp edges and soft centers that stuck lovingly to napkins. When she cut them into neat rows, steam escaped, carrying the scent of cinnamon-toasted oats and warm sugar that drifted across the yard like a soft announcement that dessert was ready. These bars were reliable, comforting, and easy to stack in tins for road trips or for handing out under shade trees. Sometimes she drizzled a bit of icing across the top, sometimes she left them plain, but they always tasted like home raisins, added bursts of sweetness in every bite, and the bars felt hearty enough to satisfy hungry relatives between games, conversations, and long hugs.
The secret ingredient in chocolate mayonnaise cake was the secret itself. Nobody told you what was in it until the pan was empty and the compliments had already landed. Mayonnaise replaced both eggs and oil, and it worked because mayonnaise was already eggs and oil, just emulsify. Hellmann's printed the recipe on jars starting in the 1950s, and by the early 60s, it had slipped into black kitchens across the South and up through the Great Migration cities. The cake came out impossibly moist, darker than regular chocolate cake, with a crumb so tender it almost fell apart on the fork. Cocoa powder, flour, sugar, baking soda, water, vanilla, and a full cup of mayonnaise stirred right in. No cream and butter, no separating eggs. The finished cake got dusted with powdered sugar or frosted with a simple chocolate glaze, and people ate it without ever guessing. When someone finally told them, the reaction was always the same. Silence, then laughter, then a second slice.
Cornbread trifle was the kind of dessert that proved creativity could make even leftovers feel like a feast. When cornbread went stale, it wasn't thrown away. It was reborn. Crumbled into bowls, soaked with sweet milk or molasses, and layered with bits of fruit if available, it became a pudding-like treat that filled bellies and hearts alike. The texture was soft and creamy, rich without requiring riches. It was food for the end of the week, when cupboards were bare but family still gathered to share what was left. Each spoonful carried both sweetness and survival, the magic of making something out of nothing. Cornbread trifle was not a luxury. It was an act of imagination. It turned scarcity into flavor and the ordinary into comfort. Even now, its story lingers, a reminder that sometimes the best recipes are born from the need to keep going. Potato candy may sound unusual, but it was once a beloved treat in African American households. Mashed potatoes were combined with powdered sugar until they formed a pliable dough. This mixture was then rolled out and spread with peanut butter before being rolled into logs and sliced into pinwheels. The candy was inexpensive to make and required no fancy ingredients, making it popular during lean times. Its flavor was surprisingly delightful, with the sweetness of sugar balanced by the richness of peanut butter. Children especially loved potato candy because it looked fun and felt like a reward even when resources were limited. It became a common recipe at holidays or family gatherings, where a plate of colorful slices stood proudly on the table. Though it may sound odd today, the candy was a testament to creativity and the ability to transform basic foods into something special. Potato candy was proof that ingenuity in the kitchen could create joy out of scarcity. While it is rarely made now, it remains one of those quirky and unforgettable recipes tied to heritage, memory, and the resourceful spirit of past generations. Dandelion green salad was a dish that came straight from the fields, where foraging often meant survival. Families gathered the bitter leaves, washing and tossing them with vinegar or bacon drippings when available. The greens were sharp, earthy, and full of nutrients, offering much-needed vitamins during lean times. Children often wrinkled their noses at the bitterness, but they ate it because it was what the land provided. Housewives appreciated that it cost nothing but effort, a way to feed families without spending precious money at the store. Dandelion greens were most common in spring, when fields were full and gardens had yet to produce crops. They symbolized resilience and adaptability, proof that food could be found even in weeds overlooked by others. Over time, salads grew richer and more varied, pushing dandelion greens aside. Yet in the Jim Crow South, they were more than a side dish. They were survival served on the table, a bitter but sustaining reminder of strength. Oatmeal pie was proof that creativity could sweeten scarcity. When pecans were too costly, Mama used oats instead, stirring them into a syrupy filling of butter, sugar, and eggs. As it baked, the oats floated up and toasted, forming a golden, chewy crust that crackled softly under a fork. The inside stayed gooey, warm, and sweet, with a flavor that felt both familiar and new. It smelled like breakfast, but tasted like dessert, a perfect trick born from necessity. Oatmeal pie sat proudly on Sunday tables, no apologies needed. Each slice tasted like gratitude and grit, sweet reminders that good things can come from doing your best with what you have. Served plain or with whipped cream, it never disappointed. Oatmeal pie was the taste of perseverance baked golden brown, a dessert that carried pride in every bite. Fried salt pork strips were the kind of appetizer that showed up at gatherings where people cooked from memory instead of recipes, trusting their hands to know exactly how long to leave each piece in the skillet. The strips curled and sizzled as the fat rendered out, leaving behind crisp edges and a chewy center that tasted rich, salty, and deeply familiar to anyone raised in a southern black household. They were served with mustard on the side, the sharp tang balancing the heaviness of the meat in a way that kept people reaching for more even when they insisted they were done. These little bites disappeared fast at fish fries, backyard reunions, and living room gatherings where elders talked and kids circled the food table like it was a treasure chest. Fried salt pork was not fancy, and it certainly was not delicate, but it carried the fullness of a time when families used every part of what they had and turned it into something worth sharing. Over the decades, the dish faded as leaner meats became more common, but to those who remember it, the flavor still feels tied to warmth, tradition, and a kind of cooking that came from instinct and understanding rather than store-bought convenience. Deviled eggs with paprika and pickle relish were the appetizer children fought over at every Thanksgiving gathering, their bright yellow centers dotted with red paprika creating tiny works of art. Grandmothers would boil dozens of eggs the night before, peeling them while warm and slicing lengthwise before scooping yolks into mixing bowls. The yolks were mashed with mayonnaise, yellow mustard, sweet pickle relish, and vinegar until perfectly creamy, then spooned back into egg white halves. Paprika sprinkled on top added color and smokiness. In black households during the 1970s, deviled eggs symbolized celebration, appearing at every gathering from church dinners to reunions. Children would hover near the kitchen, waiting to sneak one before dinner, knowing that once adults arrived, these treats would disappear. The combination of creamy richness, tangy pickle brightness, and paprika's heat satisfied everyone.
Number 15, rice pudding. In a kitchen where a bag of rice cost 20 cents and a quart of milk cost a dime, rice pudding was the dessert that made sense. Your mother cooked the rice until it was soft, stirred in milk, sugar, eggs, vanilla, and a handful of raisins, and baked it until the top turned a golden. Some families ate it warm. Some ate it cold the next morning. Rice pudding is one of the oldest desserts in the world, and black mothers in the 1960s made it the same way their great-grandmothers had made it during the Depression. A single pot fed a whole family for less than 30 cents. In some households, it showed up every Friday, not because anyone asked for it, because the grocery money was gone and a mother still needed to put something sweet on the table. Rice pudding did not judge your circumstances, it just showed up. Long before beignets became the face of New Orleans, black women walked the French Quarter at dawn carrying covered baskets, calling out in Creole, "Beautiful callous, still hot." These rice fritters were made from leftover cooked rice mixed with yeast, eggs, sugar, flour, and nutmeg, fried in deep lard until golden and dusted heavy with powdered sugar. The word traces to West African languages, The Yoruba akara and nupe kara, both meaning fried cake, carried across the Atlantic by enslaved people who adapted the recipe to Louisiana rice. Under Spanish colonial rule, enslaved people could purchase their freedom, and callus became one of the ways black women earned that price, selling fritters penny by penny. By the 1940s, only a handful of callus women remained. The beignet pushed them aside. No overnight yeast rise needed. A dessert that once bought people their freedom barely survives now in a few Creole cookbooks and the memories of families who remember the taste. Long before anyone outside the Carolina Lowcountry knew what Benny wafers were, African American families in the Gula and Geechee communities of South Carolina had been making them for generations, the knowledge as distinctly theirs as the seeds themselves. Benny was the Wolof word for sesame, brought to the American South through West Africa during the slave trade. By the early 1700s, sesame was growing in South Carolina, where black families cultivated it and built a culinary tradition still alive today. The wafers were thin and crunchy, nearly translucent at the edges, made from brown sugar, butter, and toasted sesame seeds dropped by the spoonful onto a baking sheet. The trick was the toasting. Seeds into a dry skillet, stirred until gold, until the kitchen filled with a nutty sweetness that meant they were ready. Underdone wafers tasted pale, overdone ones turned bitter. The right batch snapped clean and left a warmth on the tongue that lingered after the sweetness was gone.
Boiled custard was Christmas in a cup, a silky, drinkable dessert that African American families stirred slowly over low heat until it coated the back of a spoon. Unlike store-bought eggnog, this was made from scratch with eggs, sugar, milk, and vanilla, cooked with patience that couldn't be rushed. The process required constant stirring to prevent curdling, a skill grandmothers passed to daughters while sharing stories. Served chilled in small glasses, boiled custard was rich enough to feel like dessert, but light enough to sip throughout Christmas Day. Some families added a splash of bourbon for the adults, creating a version that warmed from the inside out. Children would beg for just one more glass, their upper lips painted white with creamy sweetness. The custard was often made Christmas Eve, chilling overnight so the flavors could deepen. Boiled custard represented patience and tradition, proof that the best Christmas treats couldn't be rushed or purchased.
Jell-O with fruit cocktail was the jewel-toned dessert that sparkled on tables across black households throughout the 1960s. Mothers dissolved bright red, orange, or green gelatin powder in hot water, stirred in cold, then folded in canned fruit cocktail before chilling. The result was a wobbly, sweet treat that children found endlessly fascinating, watching the suspended fruit pieces float in the colorful gel. It required no cooking beyond boiling water and could be made the night before, freeing mothers for other tasks. The dessert appeared at potlucks in decorative molds, at home in simple bowls, and always drew smiles from children who loved its bouncy texture. Fruit cocktails stretched the dessert further, making one box of Jell-O feed the whole family with fruit in every spoonful.
Rum balls were African American Christmas elegance without baking, bourbon-soaked confections that adults savored while children watched curiously. The recipe required no oven. Crushed vanilla wafers mixed with cocoa, powdered sugar, corn syrup, and generous bourbon until mixture held together. Hands shaped sticky dough into small balls, then rolled them in powdered sugar until coated. The balls aged in tins for days, flavors mellowing until reaching boozy perfection. Grandmothers made large batches, knowing they'd disappear quickly once opened. The texture was dense and fudgy, the flavor unmistakably adult, sweet with warmth from within. Children were told these were grown-up candy and promised their own when older. Rum balls appeared at card parties where adults needed something sweet. They required no special equipment, just patience and heavy hand with spirits. This no-bake tradition has faded as quick desserts replaced the aging process that made rum balls special.
Apple Brown Betty was the cozy, thrifty dessert that showed up at reunions because it made good use of leftover bread biscuits or cornbread, turning them into something warm, comforting, and sweet. Apples were sliced thin, tossed with sugar, cinnamon, and a little lemon, and then layered beneath buttery crumbs made from whatever bread the cook had on hand. As it baked, the apples softened into tender slices surrounded by syrupy juices, while the topping browned into crisp sweet bits that contrasted perfectly with the soft fruit beneath. Served warm, often with cream or ice cream, Apple Brown Betty tasted like home kitchens, autumn memories, and the creativity that turned simple scraps into something everyone loved. Buttermilk
Tomato soup cake was the kind of recipe people kept quiet about, not out of shame, but because the reveal was half the fun. A can of Campbell's condensed tomato soup went straight into the batter alongside flour, sugar, baking soda, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and shortening. The acid in the tomato reacted with the soda for lift, the moisture kept the crumbs soft, and the spices buried any savory notes so deep that nobody tasted tomato at all. What they tasted was something warm and faintly fruity, like a spice cake with a secret it refused to give up. Cream cheese frosting went on top, tangy enough to match whatever the soup was doing underneath. The recipe circulated through church bulletins and community cookbooks all through the 1960s, always handwritten, always credited to somebody's neighbor or cousin. Kids asked for it by name without knowing what was in it, and mothers smiled because the can of soup cost a dime and the cake fed 10.
Sweet potato tea cakes were soft little miracles that brought a whisper of sweetness to hard days. Made from mashed sweet potatoes, sugar, and flour, they baked up tender and fragrant, somewhere between a cookie and a biscuit. The flavor was deep and earthy, tied to the African roots that first carried sweet potatoes across the ocean. Women baked them for children after long hours in the fields, serving them with tea, molasses, or just a kind word. The dough was often mixed by hand in wooden bowls, shaped without measuring, guided only by touch and memory. Even in times when sugar was scarce, the natural sweetness of the potato carried the recipe through. Each cake was a lesson in resourcefulness and care, a soft, spiced offering that said, "We made it through another day." To eat one was to taste both survival and love, baked gently into every crumb. Sweet potato cobbler was once a holiday tradition that filled kitchens with the scent of cinnamon, nutmeg, and butter. African-American families sliced thick rounds of sweet potato, layered them with sugar and spices, then covered them in pastry crust. As the cobbler baked, the potatoes softened into a rich custard-like filling, blending perfectly with the flaky crust. Unlike fruit cobblers, sweet potato cobbler carried a heartier, more earthy flavor that felt like home in every bite. It was often served at Christmas, Thanksgiving, and church gatherings, where it was greeted with smiles and second helpings. Families valued it not only for its taste, but also for its practicality, since sweet potatoes were easy to store and lasted through winter. The dish tied celebrations to the land, as many families grew their own sweet potatoes and used them proudly in desserts. Today, sweet potato pie may still be found on tables, but cobbler has largely disappeared from the holiday spread. Its absence is a reminder of how traditions fade, yet those who tasted it remember its warmth. Sweet potato cobbler was more than dessert, it was celebration baked into every golden crust. Cane syrup pie was a cousin to pecan pie, but instead of corn syrup, it used sorghum or cane syrup that was common across the rural South. Its flavor was darker, deeper, and less polished than modern pies, with a sweetness that carried hints of molasses. This pie was not about luxury, it was about practicality, using what was grown locally when other sweeteners were expensive or unavailable. During the Civil Rights era, cane syrup pie was still a fixture in many kitchens, connecting families to older traditions of thrift. Slices were often served at church fundraisers, where their richness felt indulgent even though the recipe was born from scarcity. The pie crust was usually simple and plain, leaving the syrup filling to shine as the centerpiece. Families baked them in large pans to cut into squares and share, proving that one dessert could stretch across a crowd. Cane syrup pie carried history in every bite, a taste of the fields and the resilience of the people who worked them. Pork cracklin cornbread was a dish that made even a simple pan of bread feel like a celebration. Cracklins, small crispy bits left from rendering pork fat, were cheap to come by and packed with flavor. My grandmother folded them into cornbread batter, the fat melting and the crunchy pieces scattering through every slice. Baked until golden, it came out hearty and rich, with texture that plain cornbread never had. The salty pork balanced the sweet cornmeal, making each bite feel indulgent even though the ingredients were inexpensive. Families sliced it thick and ate it alone or alongside beans, greens, or stews, letting the cracklins carry the flavor of meat through the whole meal. In the 1960s, this kind of dish made families feel proud, as though they had something special on the table despite the hardships around them. Pork cracklin cornbread was thrift turned into joy, simple food lifted by the spirit of making do. Crab salad on saltines was a church basement classic that showed how far a single can or handful of fresh crab could go when seasoned with care. The mixture was creamy, tangy, slightly sweet, and seasoned with relish, pepper, and sometimes a touch of paprika. Families spooned it onto saltines just before serving so the crackers stayed crisp. These little bites disappeared quickly from platters because they were easy to grab, easy to eat, and packed with flavor that tasted like something far more expensive. They were the pride of church potlucks, fish fries, and community gatherings where everyone dressed their tables with their best recipes. The crab salad was not fancy, but the love and seasoning made it feel that way. Over time, as processed dips and store-bought trays replaced homemade appetizers, crab salad on saltines drifted away. But those who remember it can still taste the cool, creamy mixture meeting the crunch of the cracker. It was the kind of simple offering that felt generous, wholesome, and quietly joyful. Cheese straws made from sharp cheddar and cayenne pepper were crispy, addictive sticks that disappeared from serving bowls almost as quickly as they were refilled, their orange-gold color and spicy kick making them irresistible. Grandmothers would grate blocks of sharp cheddar by hand, mixing it with softened butter, flour, cayenne pepper, and salt until the dough came together, then pressing it through cookie presses or rolling it into long ropes before slicing. The cheese straws baked until crispy and slightly browned at the edges, filling kitchens with the sharp, tangy aroma of melting cheese mixed with subtle heat. Once cooled, they were stored in tins, maintaining crispness for days. In 1970s, Black households, cheese straws represented Southern tradition, recipes passed down through generations with each family adding their signature touch, extra cayenne, paprika, or pecans.
Number 17, chess pie. If you have never heard of chess pie, your family probably called it something else. Sugar pie, egg pie, transparent pie. It was a custard pie made from pantry staples. Eggs, sugar, a spoonful of cornmeal, butter, a splash of vinegar. That was all. The filling set in the oven into a smooth golden custard with a crackly top. Chess pie came from a time when fresh fruit was seasonal and expensive, and a mother needed a dessert she could make from whatever was in the cupboard. Some say the name was a corruption of chess pie, named for the pie safe where it was stored. Others say a woman was asked what she had baked and she shrugged and said, "It is just pie. What matters is that your mother could make this with 5 ingredients in 20 minutes. In 1964, that was everything. That was exactly when they became perfect. Fried banana fritters took overripe fruit and turned it into something golden, crisp, and impossibly rich. Mashed into batter with flour, a beaten egg, sugar, and cinnamon, then dropped in rounds into hot lard. The natural sugars caramelized against the oil, creating edges that crackled into the warm center. Caribbean influence ran deep. Plantain fritter versions existed across the islands, and as families from Jamaica and Trinidad settled in southern port cities during the 1940s and 50s, those recipes merged with African American frying traditions already old. Some cooks added vanilla. Others drizzled brown sugar dissolved in butter over the top. The whole thing cost almost nothing and used fruit headed for the trash, resourceful and indulgent in the same bite. Peanut butter fudge became the democratic Christmas candy of 1960s Black households, affordable enough for every family, delicious enough for every palate, and simple enough for beginning cooks to master. The recipe required only sugar, milk, butter, and peanut butter, ingredients that most pantries contained even during tight financial times. Mothers cooked the mixture on the stovetop, stirring constantly to prevent scorching, then beat it vigorously until it thickened and lost its shine. Poured into buttered pans and scored while still warm, the fudge set into squares that were creamy yet firm enough to hold their shape. The peanut butter flavor dominated, rich, salty, and satisfying in ways that chocolate fudge couldn't match. Children helped with stirring and learned that candy making required patience and attention rather than expensive ingredients. Plates of peanut butter fudge appeared at every Christmas gathering, disappearing quickly as guests returned for seconds and thirds. Scripture cake required a certain kind of baker, one who knew her Bible well enough to gather the ingredients without a shopping list, because every measurement was given as a Bible verse, not a number. This tradition lived in African American church kitchens from the late 1800s through the 1960s, passed hand to hand through Baptist and AME congregations where baking and worship shared the same afternoon. The butter came from Judges 5:25, the honey from Samuel 14:25, the figs from Nahum 3:12. Each ingredient was coded in scripture, so only the women who knew the verses knew the recipe. It was a spiced fruit cake, dense with dried fruit and nuts, heavy with molasses and warm spice. Making it was a form of study. Serving it was a form of testimony. Young women who wanted to learn the recipe learned the scripture first. That particular literacy, knowing chapter and verse by heart, belonged to that generation. It slipped away when they did.
Peanut brittle was the Christmas candy that African American families made in large batches, filling tins that would be given as gifts and kept for holiday snacking. The process required courage. Cooking sugar to the hard crack stage meant watching temperatures climb past 300 degrees while stirring constantly. Raw peanuts were added at just the right moment, toasting in the hot sugar until golden and fragrant. Baking soda was stirred in quickly, creating the tiny bubbles that made brittle shatter rather than stick to teeth. The mixture was poured onto buttered slabs and spread thin before it hardened. Families learned the hard way that humidity could ruin a batch, making the brittle sticky instead of crisp. Successful batches were broken into jagged pieces and stored in airtight tins. Peanut brittle was often the last candy made before Christmas because it required dry weather and full attention. This candy was science and tradition combined, a sweet reminder that the best treats demanded respect.
Sugar bread was perhaps the simplest dessert in any Black mother's repertoire, requiring nothing more than bread, butter, and white sugar. Soft white bread was spread with butter and sprinkled generously with sugar, then folded in half or eaten open-faced as an afternoon treat. Children requested it constantly, the combination of soft bread, rich butter, and sweet crunch satisfying something deep in their souls. Mothers made it when the pantry held little else, when children needed something sweet before dinner, or when there was simply no time for anything more elaborate. The dessert cost almost nothing and could be assembled in under a minute, making it the ultimate solution for busy households. Some mothers toasted the bread first for extra crunch, while others added a dash of cinnamon to make it feel fancy.
Jam cake with caramel icing was the crown jewel of African American Christmas baking, a dark spice cake made rich with blackberry jam and covered in glossy, homemade caramel. The cake was dense and moist, flavored with cinnamon, allspice, cloves, and nutmeg that filled houses with holiday warmth. Grandmothers folded in cups of homemade blackberry jam, often preserved from summer picking, which gave distinctive fruity depth. The real glory was the caramel icing, sugar and butter cooked until golden, then beaten smooth while cooling. Getting caramel right required experience. Too hot and it turned to candy, too cool and it wouldn't spread. When done perfectly, the icing formed a glossy shell that cracked slightly with each slice, revealing dark, jeweled cake beneath. Jam cake appeared at Christmas dinner as proof of the baker's skill and love, often made only by the family matriarch. The combination of spice cake and caramel icing has become rare as fewer cooks attempt the temperamental frosting.
Pig's feet with vinegar sauce were not for the impatient or the faint-hearted. They demanded long hours of boiling and careful cleaning before the meat turned silky soft and rich with flavor. For many families, this dish represented endurance itself, transforming what others threw away into a delicacy that filled the soul. The vinegar cut through the heaviness, adding a tang that woke the taste buds and stretched the appetite. When cooked just right, the gelatin shimmered, thickening the sauce and coating every tender bite. Pig's feet weren't glamorous, but they were honest. They told the truth about survival, about making something from nearly nothing and taking pride in it. Around tables, they sparked stories and laughter, the kind only shared by people who'd known struggle and joy in equal measure. The smell of that vinegar sauce carried through neighborhoods like a promise that good eating didn't need riches. It reminded everyone that patience, thrift, and skill could turn even the roughest ingredients into a dish worthy of celebration. Pig's feet with vinegar sauce were a triumph of flavor and faith, proof that nothing worth keeping ever comes easy.
Sugar cookies were the dessert you made with someone, not for someone. Flour, butter, sugar, eggs, vanilla, and a pinch of salt mixed into a dough that went into the icebox until it firmed, then rolled out on a flour counter with a rolling pin that might have been your grandmother's. Cookie cutters were a luxury most kitchens didn't have. You used the rim of a drinking glass for circles, a knife for rough stars, and your imagination for everything else. The cookies baked fast, 8 minutes at most, and came out pale and soft. Colored sugar went on before baking if you had it. A thin glaze of powdered sugar and milk went on after if you didn't. Christmas was the season, but sugar cookies also showed up at baby showers and any afternoon when a mother wanted her kids in the kitchen instead of on the street. The dough stuck to small hands. The flour covered everything. The finished cookies were uneven, cracked, imperfect. And that was the whole point. They carried fingerprints. Some of those fingerprints belong to people who aren't here anymore.
Sorghum custard pudding was the taste of warmth on cold nights, made with simple ingredients and endless patience. Milk, eggs, and sorghum syrup came together in one heavy dish, stirred slowly over fire until they thickened into velvet. The flavor was sweet, earthy, and rich with comfort. It was the dessert of those who worked with what they had. No sugar, no fine flour, just what nature offered and hands could make. Served warm, it soothed empty stomachs and weary spirits alike. The pudding glowed like amber in the lamplight, reminding families that care and time could make anything beautiful. It wasn't about extravagance. It was about balance, of hunger and hope, of bitterness and sweetness. Long before desserts were written down, this one was felt in the heart and remembered by taste. Sorghum custard pudding was love made visible, stirred slow enough to last. Peach ice cream made by hand was a summer joy, created outdoors with hand-crank freezers packed with ice and salt. African-American families gathered on porches or yards, taking turns turning the handle as the mixture churned slowly into frozen cream. Fresh peaches, peeled and mashed, were stirred into the custard base, giving the dessert its bright sweetness. The process took time and teamwork, but that was part of its magic. Children waited eagerly for the first scoop, often licking the paddles clean once the freezer was opened. The flavor was unmatched, fresher and richer than anything from a store. It was also an event, more than just dessert, since making it brought everyone together in laughter and effort. Peach ice cream was served at reunions, picnics, and summer holidays, where it cooled hot afternoons and created lasting memories. Today, machines and pre-made cartons have replaced the ritual, but they cannot replace the feeling. Hand-churned peach ice cream was more than food. It was family and tradition, spun into sweetness. Sweet corn ice cream was a farmhouse specialty that blended seasonal corn with milk, sugar, and cream into a frozen treat. It may sound unusual today, but it was once considered a refreshing dessert across many southern and rural communities. Families who grew corn in abundance used every part of the crop, and turning it into ice cream showed both creativity and thrift. The result was a subtly sweet, rich, and slightly savory dessert that cooled people during hot summers. During the Civil Rights era, sweet corn ice cream could be found at community picnics, where large churns were made outdoors and shared with everyone present. The novelty of the flavor made it memorable for children, while adults appreciated its reminder of homegrown resilience. Making ice cream was also an act of joy in difficult times, requiring effort, patience, and a willingness to share the final product with neighbors. Sweet corn ice cream was not just a dessert, it was a celebration of turning simplicity into delight. Peach cobbler with biscuit crust was the kind of dessert that announced itself before you ever saw it. The smell of bubbling peaches thickened with sugar, and butter floated through the air, wrapping around you like a hug after church. Mamas would drop spoonfuls of biscuit dough across the top, never too perfect, always just right. In the oven, it browned into golden peaks that cracked open to reveal syrup thick as honey. Served hot from the skillet, it hissed when the first spoon cut through, juices pooling under the crust. Vanilla ice cream on top was optional, but nobody ever said no. This was the dessert that could turn silence into praise and leftovers into legend. You could taste the sunshine in every bite, sweet from the fruit, warm from the oven, and rich from the hand that stirred it. Peach cobbler carried the spirit of summer even in winter, reminding everyone that joy was meant to be shared. It was messy, sticky, and absolutely perfect, proof that flavor came from feeling, not fancy tools. The last bite always tasted like gratitude, the kind that lingers long after the bowl's been scraped clean. One spoonful, and the whole world slowed down. Okra patties were small fritters that turned a humble vegetable into something golden and irresistible, especially in households where okra grew in backyard gardens or local fields. Families chopped the pods finely, folding them into a batter seasoned with onion, pepper, and whatever spices the cook favored that day. The mixture hit the skillet in small spoonfuls, sizzling into patties with crisp edges and soft centers that tasted earthy, savory, and slightly sweet from the okra itself. These patties were easy to make in large batches, which made them perfect for church gatherings, holiday tables, or Sunday visits when neighbors stopped by without warning. They were eaten plain, dipped in hot sauce, or served beside other snacks that filled long tables lined with mismatched platters. Okra patties faded over the years as fresh okra became less common in urban kitchens, and younger generations moved toward meals that were quicker and easier. But those who remember them can still picture the bubbling skillet, the scent drifting across the room, and the pride of a cook who knew how to turn simple ingredients into something unforgettable. Okra patties were not just food. They were a link to gardeners, to elders, to summers spent outdoors, and to kitchens full of patient hands. Pigs in blankets made with cocktail franks wrapped in crescent roll dough emerged from ovens as perfect little packages that children ate by the handful, their small size making them perfect for young appetites and hands that grabbed multiple pieces at once. Mothers would unroll refrigerated crescent dough, separating it along the perforations before cutting each triangle in half to create smaller pieces that wrapped around cocktail-sized hot dogs snugly. The wrapped franks were arranged on baking sheets with the dough seam facing down, sometimes brushed with melted butter or beaten egg for extra golden color. As they baked, the dough puffed up and turned flaky and golden, while the franks inside steamed and stayed juicy, creating combinations of textures that made every bite satisfying. In the 1970s, Black households, pigs in blankets represented quick, crowd-pleasing appetizers. Children loved them because they were perfectly sized for little hands.
Number 21, pound cake. Every Black mother in the 1960s had a pound cake recipe, and every one of them believed hers was the best. The original formula was simple: 1 pound of butter, 1 pound of sugar, 1 pound of eggs, 1 pound of flour. That was it. No baking powder, no baking soda. The rise came from beating the eggs long enough to trap air in the batter. Your mother stood at the counter and creamed butter and sugar by hand with a wooden spoon for 15 minutes until her arm ached. The cake baked low and slow, sometimes for an hour and a half. A good pound cake was dense, moist, and golden. It did not need frosting. It sat on a plate under a glass dome, and it was the first thing offered to anyone who walked through the front door. In the Black church, pound cake was currency. That cake was proof that someone in the house knew how to bake. She mashed them while they were still hot. Sweet potatoes pulled from the oven, skins splitting, steam rising off the orange flesh. Mixed with flour, a crack of egg, nutmeg, grated fresh, and just enough sugar to let the potato lead. Fried sweet potato cakes had roots running to West Africa, where similar fritters called puff-puff were fried in palm oil at open markets. In the American South, the technique adapted to what grew in Black family gardens: sweet potatoes by the bushel, shaped by hand, flattened into thick patties, and fried in lard until the edges crisped into a caramel dark crust, while the center stayed soft. The key was never over-mixing. You wanted flecks of potato in every bite. Sprinkled with cinnamon and served hot, they showed up at Sunday tables and after-church gatherings. By the 1980s, boxed mixes replaced from scratch frying, and these quiet cakes slipped off the table without anyone asking for the recipe until it was too late. Japanese fruit cake held a mystifying name that had nothing to do with Japan and everything to do with Southern Black Christmas tradition. This layered spice cake, alternated with coconut filling, became the centerpiece that grandmothers started preparing weeks before the holiday arrived. The layers were dense with raisins, nuts, and warm spices, cinnamon, allspice, and cloves that perfumed kitchens for days. Between each layer went a cooked filling of fresh coconut, sugar, and citrus that set into something almost candy-like. Families debated whether the name came from the exotic coconut or simply from wanting the cake to sound fancy. What mattered more was the ritual: children grating coconuts by hand, mothers stirring filling on the stove, grandmothers supervising every step. The cake improved as it aged, wrapped in cloth and stored in cool pantries where flavors melded into something transcendent. By Christmas morning, each slice revealed beautiful layers that tasted like heritage itself. The peach preserves layer cake was why she spent 2 full July days at the canning pot, filling jar after jar with fruit from the neighbor's tree, because she already knew what those jars would become come November. African American women in the South understood preserving season as planning ahead. You were not canning for next week. You were canning for the holidays, for the church anniversary supper, for the birthday cake that would make the room go quiet when it was carried in. The cake was a yellow butter cake baked in 3 rounds, cooled completely before assembly. The filling went in thick between each layer, not jam, but the chunky, sweet tart preserves she had made herself, and the difference between homemade and store-bought was the difference between a dessert and a memory. She frosted the outside lightly, letting the gold of the peaches show at the edges. The cake rested overnight, the preserves soaked into the sponge, and the layers became one. Nobody thought to ask how she got the taste exactly the same every year while she was still alive to tell them.
Fig preserves cake was the Christmas dessert that connected African American families to the fig trees their grandmothers had planted and tended for generations. Homemade fig preserves, put up during summer's harvest, were folded into a spiced batter that baked into a moist, dense cake perfect for the holidays. The figs gave the cake a jammy sweetness and kept it tender for over a week, improving with each passing day. Black families often grew their own fig trees, inherited from parents who inherited them from grandparents, making the preserves themselves a legacy. The cake was typically baked in a tube or bundt pan, glazed simply with powdered sugar or dressed with cream cheese frosting for special occasions. Slices revealed pockets of whole fig preserves suspended throughout the crumb. Fig preserves cake was Christmas rooted in the land, in the patience of growing and preserving, in the understanding that the sweetest celebrations came from tending what you had been given and sharing it with those you loved most.
Graham cracker sandwiches were the secret weapon of busy mothers who needed something sweet in seconds flat. 2 graham cracker squares sandwiched a thick layer of frosting, peanut butter, or sweetened cream cheese, creating a handheld treat that satisfied without any cooking. Children came home from school to find these waiting on kitchen counters, the simple combination somehow tasting better than anything store-bought. Mothers kept graham crackers in the pantry specifically for these quick desserts, knowing they could assemble a batch while doing other tasks. The crackers provided just enough crunch against the creamy filling, and the whole thing could be eaten without plates or forks. Some mothers added chocolate drizzle or cinnamon to make them feel special.
Grease gravy rice was what people cooked when they refused to let anything go to waste. When breakfast meats were done frying, the leftover grease became treasure. A spoon of flour went in first, sizzling and popping until it turned golden. Then milk or water got poured in, slow and steady, until it thickened into smooth gravy. That hot gravy poured over white rice made something out of nearly nothing. It was salty, creamy, and smoky all at once. The smell filled the house, and the taste filled the stomach. Parents called it breakfast, but it could carry a family through an entire day. It came from kitchens that knew survival like a second language, where flavor was earned from thrift and patience. Kids grew up thinking it was comfort food, not knowing it was born from rationing and struggle. Grease gravy rice was more than a recipe. It was a declaration that no meal was too small to matter. Every bite was a promise that the family would eat, even when times were lean. It was humble food that carried pride on a spoon. Rabbit and dumplings was the meal that turned a quiet woodland hunt into a hearty family supper, when store-bought meat was rare. Hunters brought back rabbits dressed and cleaned, and cooks simmered the lean meat slowly with onions, carrots, and herbs until it fell from the bone. Soft flour dumplings were dropped into the rich broth, swelling as they absorbed the savory flavor and thickened the stew. The dish fed large households through cold nights, stretching a single rabbit to satisfy many plates. Children learned to roll the dumpling dough while elders told stories of patient mornings in the woods and the respect owed to the animal that provided the meal. The aroma of simmering broth filled cabins and farm kitchens, promising comfort after long days of work. With modern markets providing endless options, few families still prepare rabbit in this old style. Yet those who recall the tender meat and pillowy dumplings speak of a warmth and gratitude that no packaged dinner can ever replace.
Dump cake asks nothing of you. No mixing, no measuring eggs, no cream and butter, no technique at all. A can of fruit, usually cherry pie filling or crushed pineapple, dumped into a baking dish. A box of yellow cake mix scattered dry over the top. Thin slices of butter laid across the surface like tiles, into the oven, and that was it. The butter melted down through the dry mix, the fruit bubbled up from below, and somewhere in between they met and made something, part cobbler, part cake, entirely its own category. The edges went crispy where the butter pooled. The center stayed soft and fruity, almost molten. It fed a crowd for under $1 in 1965, and the woman who brought it to the church supper didn't apologize for how easy it was. Dump cake was the last dessert my mother made before her hands started shaking too much to hold the butter knife steady. She made it because she could still make it. That mattered more than any recipe that required precision.
Cornpone pudding was the kind of dish that blurred the line between dessert and sustenance. Cornmeal, milk, eggs, and molasses came together in a single bowl, thick as porridge and sweet as survival. Baked slow until the top turned golden brown, it filled homes with the scent of earth and sugar mingled with smoke. The pudding was hearty, the kind of food that stuck to your ribs and stayed with you through hard days. It was spooned out warm, maybe with a bit of butter melting across its surface, turning thrift into tenderness. Cornpone pudding could feed many, stretching ingredients just far enough to comfort everyone at the table. It was proof that simplicity did not mean lack. It meant wisdom. For the enslaved and the free alike, corn was both foundation and gift. Cornpone pudding was never just about feeding the body. It was about reminding the soul of abundance, even when little remained. It was sweetness you could taste and strength you could feel, a humble masterpiece born from corn and courage. Coconut custard pie was once a staple at church potlucks and family reunions, where its creamy texture and tropical flavor stood out among other desserts. African-American cooks blended eggs, milk, sugar, and shredded coconut to make a custard filling that baked into a golden, fragrant pie. The coconut added both sweetness and texture, turning a simple custard into something memorable. It was often served in generous slices, paired with coffee or sweet tea after a hearty meal. Coconut custard pie symbolized celebration, reminding everyone that even the simplest ingredients could feel indulgent when made with care. Families often guarded their recipes closely, adding small twists like nutmeg, lemon zest, or a splash of vanilla to make their version unique. Children often remembered it as the taste of church gatherings, where long tables were filled with home-baked desserts made with love. Today, coconut cream pies remain popular, but the custard version has nearly disappeared. Its absence leaves a quiet gap in cultural memory, even though it once stood proudly on countless tables. Coconut custard pie deserves to be remembered as one of the clever, cherished desserts no one makes anymore. Cornflake candy was one of those clever desserts born out of convenience and necessity. It required no baking, only a mixture of cornflakes with syrup or melted sugar pressed into bars or clusters. These candies became staples at community events because they could be made in large batches without much cost. Children especially loved them for their crunch and sweetness, while parents appreciated how quickly they could be prepared. During the Civil Rights era, cornflake candy often showed up on tables at church gatherings and youth meetings, filling plates alongside homemade pies and cakes. The simplicity of the recipe meant anyone could contribute, even those who could not afford expensive ingredients. That sense of inclusion was part of what made desserts like this so important. They allowed everyone to take part in feeding the community. Cornflake candy was more than a quick fix. It was a shared sweet that spoke to unity. Hoe cakes were more than just cornmeal pancakes. They were a connection to labor, history, and home. Made from a simple batter of cornmeal, water, and a pinch of salt, they were cooked on flat iron griddles, skillets, or even the flat side of a hoe blade over an open fire. This made them quick to prepare in the fields or at home, perfect for feeding hungry workers. Hoe cakes had a crisp edge, soft center, and a flavor that paired well with everything from syrup to savory stews. In African American history, they represented sustenance during long days and ingenuity in cooking methods. They could be eaten for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, depending on what was available to serve alongside them. While modern kitchens have replaced open fires, the memory of hoe cakes remains tied to family stories and community meals. Their simplicity made them timeless, yet their presence on tables today is far less common than it once was. Souse meat squares were one of the boldest appetizers of mid-century African-American gatherings, made from pork head cheese set in a tangy gelatin seasoned with vinegar and spices. Families sliced it into neat cubes and served it cold. The flavor was sharp, savory, and unforgettable, loved by elders who grew up eating every part of the animal. These squares appeared at card parties, fish fries, and social gatherings where people knew how to appreciate strong flavors. Younger generations sometimes avoided them, but those who loved them swore there was nothing else like it. The texture was firm but tender, the taste bold but satisfying. Over time, as fewer people made homemade souse, the dish nearly vanished. But for those who remember it, souse meat squares taste like history, resilience, and the resourceful cooking that carried families through lean times. Cocktail sausages wrapped in flaky biscuit dough emerged from ovens as golden crescents that children grabbed from cooling racks, burning their fingers but unable to wait. Mothers would roll out refrigerated biscuit dough, cutting it into strips before wrapping each small sausage like a tiny gift and arranging them on greased baking sheets. The wrapped sausages baked until the dough turned golden brown and flaky, the fat from the sausages creating pockets of rich, meaty flavor. Some families brushed the tops with melted butter and sesame seeds before baking, adding extra richness and subtle, nutty crunch. In Black households during the 1970s, these sausage rolls appeared at every major holiday, their ease of preparation making them perfect for busy cooks managing multiple dishes. Children loved them because they were small, portable, and perfectly sized for little hands.
Number 18, coconut layer cake. This was the cake that took all day. Your mother started in the morning. She cracked a fresh coconut with a hammer, drained the water, pried out the meat, and grated it by hand on a box grater. That alone took an hour. Then she baked a yellow cake from scratch, split it into layers, made a boiled frosting from sugar and egg whites, and covered every surface with freshly grated coconut. The result was a tall, snow-white cake that looked like it belonged in a bakery window. In the Black community, coconut cake has roots that go back before the Civil War. Enslaved women did the difficult work of cracking and grating coconut for their enslavers' tables. After emancipation, that same cake became a centerpiece of Black celebrations. It showed up at Christmas, at church homecomings, and at weddings. A coconut cake was not just a dessert, it was a statement. By the time your mother's generation passed, most people had switched to bags of shredded flakes from the store. The cake survived, but the tradition of grating it fresh did not. The custard had to be cold, ice cold, set overnight until firm enough to hold shape on a spoon. That was the first test. If it jiggled too much, it dissolved in the oil and ruined the batch. Fried egg custard puffs were a holiday dessert in Black households across Virginia and the Carolinas. Rich custard, cooked slow with sugar, vanilla, and nutmeg, spooned into small nests of batter and fried until the shell turned gold while the filling stayed cool inside. The technique connected to West African puff puff and French beignet traditions running through Creole cooking. But the custard filling was purely a Black Southern invention, stretching expensive holiday eggs one more course. The women who mastered these read the oil by sound. A low rumble meant too cool, a high sizzle meant too hot, and the soft whisper between meant the custard would survive. They stood without a thermometer, flipping puffs with a bent fork. After they passed, the recipe cards turned up in drawers, but nobody could get the temperature right by feel. 7-Up pound cake became the modern marvel of 1960s Black Christmas baking, using the popular lemon-lime soda to create impossibly moist cake with subtle citrus brightness. The carbonation made the cake rise higher and stay tender longer than traditional recipes, while the lemon-lime flavor added complexity without requiring fresh citrus. Mothers discovered the recipe through friends, church cookbooks, or the back of 7-Up bottles, then adapted it to their tastes. The cake was baked in tube pans or bundt pans, its golden crust hiding the incredibly moist interior that stayed fresh for days. Some mothers glazed it with powdered sugar and lemon juice, while others served it plain, confident the cake needed no enhancement. 7-Up. Pound cake traveled to every Christmas gathering, sliced thick and arranged on platters that emptied before other desserts were touched. The recipe proved that innovation and tradition could coexist, creating something new that honored the pound cake legacy Black families carried through generations. Nobody told you the lemon pudding cake had a trick until you lifted the first spoonful and found two completely different textures where you expected one. The batter went into the pan as a single thin mixture, but the heat separated it, egg whites rising into a light spongy cake on top, while the lemon sugar base settled into a smooth tart custard below. African American home bakers in the 1950s and 60s loved this dessert for its economy. One bowl, a handful of pantry ingredients, 30 minutes in the oven. The lemon had to be fresh, juice and zest both, because the brightness of the custard depended on the acid. She used sour milk if buttermilk was not on hand. You spooned it into bowls, and the two layers appeared, soft cake above, warm lemon custard pooling below. A dessert that looked ordinary from across the room and astonished you the first time you tasted it.
Brown sugar pound cake was the humble cousin of fancier Christmas cakes, yet it held its own on African American holiday tables with deep caramel flavor and incredible density. Unlike white sugar pound cakes, this version used dark brown sugar that gave the crumb a molasses-tinged sweetness and golden brown color. The recipe followed the traditional pound cake ratio, a pound each of butter, sugar, eggs, and flour, but the brown sugar transformed everything. Black families baked these in tube pans, letting them cool completely before turning out cakes that were heavy enough to anchor a dessert table. Some added pecans or a brown sugar glaze, but many served the cake plain, its flavor rich enough to stand alone. The cake sliced beautifully days after baking, making it ideal for Christmas week when company came and went. Brown sugar pound cake was proof that simplicity could be just as celebratory as complexity when the ingredients spoke for themselves.
Frozen Kool-Aid cups were summer salvation, providing icy sweetness when store-bought popsicles were too expensive for large families. Mothers mixed Kool-Aid with extra sugar and water, poured it into small paper cups, and froze them until solid with a plastic spoon stuck in for a handle. Children lined up at the freezer on hot afternoons, grabbing cups that stained their lips and tongues bright red, purple, or orange. The dessert cost pennies to make in large batches, allowing mothers to keep the freezer stocked throughout summer months. As the ice melted, children would drink the sweetened liquid from the bottom, extending the treat as long as possible. Some mothers added fruit pieces before freezing, creating fancier versions that still cost almost nothing to produce.
Cranberry orange gelatin mold was the festive centerpiece that sparkled under holiday lights, sitting proudly in its familiar metal mold on Christmas tables throughout the 1960s. Mothers mixed cranberry sauce, orange zest, sugar, and gelatin, pouring the mixture into molds shaped like rings, wreaths, or holiday designs. When it chilled overnight, it emerged glossy and jewel-toned, firm enough to hold its shape, but soft enough to melt on the tongue. Children loved the wobble, tapping the plate lightly just to see it jiggle before taking a bite. The flavor balanced tart cranberry with bright citrus, making it refreshing alongside heavier holiday dishes. Mothers appreciated that it required few ingredients, stretched far, and looked impressive without costing much. It added color to plates filled with greens, dressing, and meats, offering a sweet note between savory bites. This dish represented the creativity and pride mothers brought to holiday meals, transforming canned and simple ingredients into something festive and memorable. Even decades later, people remembered the cool sweetness and the joy of unmolding it just right. Cranberry orange gelatin mold tasted like holiday sparkles shaped by steady hands. Pound cake trifles made from leftover cake were the clever reunion dessert trick grandmothers used to stretch what they had into something that looked brand new. When slices of pound cake began to dry out, she cut them into cubes, soaking them lightly with fruit juice pudding or sweetened cream to bring them back to life. Then she layered the cubes with fruit custard and whipped topping, building the dessert in glass bowls where each layer showed like colorful stripes. Peaches, strawberries, bananas, or canned fruit cocktail all worked beautifully, adding sweetness and color to the creamy layers. By the time the trifle was finished, no one could guess it had started with leftovers. It tasted soft, refreshing, and indulgent, especially after a heavy meal. Pound cake trifles proved that resourcefulness was part of the reunion tradition, turning yesterday's dessert into today's showstopper.
Lazy Daisy cake earned its name honestly. It was the cake for the woman who didn't have time to fuss, but still wanted something worth putting on a plate. The base was a simple hot milk sponge, eggs beaten with sugar until thick, flour folded in, warm milk with butter stirred through at the end. It baked fast, barely 25 minutes, and came out plain and golden. Then the topping went on while the cake was still in the pan. Brown sugar, melted butter, shredded coconut, and a splash of cream spread across the surface and slid under the broiler. You had to watch it like a child near a stove, because the difference between perfectly golden and black was about 45 seconds. The broiled topping bubbled and caramelized into a crunchy shell that crackled when you pressed a fork through it. The recipe dated back to the 1930s, but came back strong in the 60s when quick oats made the oatmeal variation easier. It was the cake that said, "I care enough to bake, but not enough to frost."
Caramel bread pudding was born in the corners of quiet kitchens, where nothing was wasted and everything had purpose. Day-old bread soaked in milk, eggs, and sugar became a dessert of astonishing richness once baked with a drizzle of caramelized syrup. The edges crisped, while the inside stayed soft and custard-like, every bite warm and buttery with a hint of burnt sugar. It was the sort of dessert that stretched humble ingredients to their full glory, comforting, dependable, and generous. People made it after Sunday supper or for gatherings, serving it straight from the pan with spoons and laughter. The sweetness wasn't just in the taste, it was in the act of turning leftovers into something beautiful. The caramel, cooked just long enough to darken but not burn, gave depth to the flavor, transforming simplicity into elegance. Sometimes raisins or nuts were added, sometimes a dash of spice. But the heart of the dish remained the same: resourcefulness turned delicious. Caramel bread pudding was not a dish of luxury, but of gratitude, a way of saying that even what seemed forgotten still had worth, that love could be reheated and shared again. Sweet potato fritters with syrup turned an everyday staple into something joyful and celebratory. Grated sweet potatoes were mixed with flour and sugar, fried into patties, and then dusted with more sugar or drizzled with syrup. They were crisp on the outside and tender inside, carrying the rich flavor of the sweet potato in every bite. During the Civil Rights era, these fritters appeared often at gatherings because they were cheap to make and fed many mouths with little effort. Sweet potatoes were plentiful and versatile, making them one of the most relied-on foods of the time. Children loved the sweetness, while adults appreciated their hearty nature. Served hot off the pan, sweet potato fritters could brighten even the most ordinary meal. Families who gathered around tables to share them found comfort not only in taste but also in tradition. These fritters embodied the strength of resourceful cooking, turning basic ingredients into desserts that felt special, filling homes with the aroma of resilience and care. Ham bone soup with vegetables was one of those meals where one piece of meat flavored an entire pot. A single ham bone, stripped of most of its meat, simmered for hours with onions, carrots, and potatoes until the broth turned rich and smoky. My grandmother would add beans or greens if she had them, letting the flavors meld into something far more substantial than the ingredients suggested. Families gathered around steaming bowls, dipping bread into the broth and savoring the flavor the bone had left behind. It was frugal cooking at its finest, taking scraps and stretching them into nourishment. The soup fed many mouths, warmed cold nights, and made do with what was available. In the 1960s, when meat was costly, a ham bone could be the centerpiece of dinner, proving that thrift and patience could coax flavor out of nearly anything. Ham bone soup with vegetables carried both practicality and comfort in every ladleful. Ham salad finger sandwiches were the small but mighty stars of every gathering where someone needed to feed a crowd without spending much. Families ground leftover ham from holidays, mixed it with relish, mayonnaise, mustard, and seasonings, then spread it on soft white bread before cutting each sandwich into tidy rectangles. They were simple, soft, salty, and satisfying. These finger sandwiches stacked easily on trays and always disappeared long before the main dishes arrived. They tasted like tradition, like resourcefulness, like someone knew how to stretch leftovers into something wonderful. Kids loved them because they were small and easy to eat. Adults loved them because they reminded them of earlier times when nothing went to waste. As party foods became more polished and modern, ham salad finger sandwiches faded from view. But a single bite would bring back memories of card tables, church socials, and family gatherings held in living rooms that smelled like good cooking and generosity. Miniature cornbread muffins with honey butter were golden gems that children popped into their mouths whole, the crumbly cornbread texture melting while sweet honey butter added richness. Mothers would prepare cornbread batter using stone-ground cornmeal, flour, eggs, buttermilk, and just enough sugar to balance the corn's natural earthiness, then spoon it into mini muffin tins that baked quickly. The muffins emerged from ovens with crispy, slightly caramelized tops and tender, crumbly interiors that begged to be broken open and slathered with butter. Honey butter was made by whipping softened butter with honey until fluffy and smooth, creating a spread that melted instantly when slathered on hot muffins. In the 1970s, Black households, these miniature cornbread muffins represented Southern hospitality in bite-sized form. Children loved them because they were individually portioned, making them feel like special treats rather than ordinary bread, and the sweet honey butter made every bite feel indulgent and special.
Number 23, peach cobbler. If you grew up in a Black household in the South, you remember the sound of peach cobbler before you remember the taste, the bubbling, the crust cracking in the oven. Black mothers made cobbler from fresh peaches in summer and canned peaches in winter. The crust was biscuit dough, sometimes rolled, sometimes dropped in rough spoonfuls on top of the fruit. Sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, a little vanilla, a generous amount of butter. That was the whole recipe. In rural Georgia and Mississippi, families picked peaches from trees in their yards. There was no cost. In the cities, a can of peaches cost 15 cents. A cobbler fed 8. Your mother did not need a cookbook for this. She needed a deep pan, a hot oven, and enough butter to make the crust golden. They were following a memory. Fried peach ham pies were the kind of dessert you smelled before you saw the plate. Dried peaches simmered to a thick, sweet pulp, spooned onto rounds of biscuit dough, folded shut, and slid into a cast iron skillet of hot lard. In North Carolina, folks called them peach jacks, and the name alone could start a family argument. The secret was always dried fruit, never fresh. Families hung peach slices on strings in late summer until they shriveled into chewy ribbons of concentrated sweetness. You knew the oil was right by the sound, a sharp crackle the instant the edge hit the surface. Black cooks across Georgia and the Carolinas wrapped these in wax paper for field workers and packed them into baskets for church homecomings. They traveled north during the Great Migration, tucked into suitcases for long train rides. You can find versions at gas stations now, but they carry none of the warmth. The ones she fried with peaches she dried herself and dough she mixed by feel. Those disappeared the morning she stopped getting up early enough to make them. Blackberry jam cake emerged from summer's preserved bounty, using jars of homemade jam that mothers had put up months earlier when berries hung heavy on roadside bushes. The cake itself was dense and spiced with cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg, its crumb moistened by blackberry jam stirred directly into the batter. The deep purple-brown color made it look almost like chocolate cake, surprising guests who expected one flavor and discovered another entirely. Blackberry jam cake was especially common in rural communities where families still gathered wild berries each summer, preserving them in mason jars that lined pantry shelves like jewels. The cake required no fancy frosting. A simple glaze or dusting of powdered sugar let the jam flavor shine through. Each slice connected Christmas to summer, to family berry picking expeditions, to the labor of preservation that made winter abundance possible. The cake represented the cycle of seasons and the wisdom of saving summer's sweetness for December's cold. If the church potluck had one certainty, it was that somebody's grandmother had brought the sour cream pound cake, and the pan would be empty before the table was cleared. This was not the dry, crumbling version from a box. It was dense and moist in a way only a full cup of sour cream could produce, the acid reacting with the baking soda to give the crumb a tenderness that lasted 3 days. African-American home bakers in the 1950s and 60s understood that sour cream was the difference between a pound cake that tasted good and one that tasted like it had been made by someone who genuinely knew what they were doing. No frosting on a sour cream pound cake. The golden crust was the entire presentation. She baked it in a tube pan, set it upside down on the neck of a bottle to cool, and you could not slice it warm no matter how much you wanted to. These women knew their ovens without a thermometer, by how the kitchen smelled, by when that browned butter sweetness filled the whole house.
Blackberry wine cake was the Christmas dessert that let African-American families incorporate homemade fruit wine into holiday celebrations. The cake batter was moistened with blackberry wine instead of milk, giving it a deep purple tint and subtle fruit flavor that set it apart from ordinary cakes. Black families often made their own wine from summer berries, saving bottles specifically for Christmas baking. The alcohol baked out, leaving behind concentrated berry essence that perfumed kitchens for hours. The cake was dense and rich, typically baked in a bundt or tube pan and glazed with a mixture of powdered sugar and more wine. Some families soaked the finished cake in additional wine, creating a dessert that improved over several days as the flavors melded. Blackberry wine cake connected summer harvests to winter celebrations, honoring the tradition of preserving and stretching what the land provided into something worth celebrating.
Cinnamon sugar toast was the dessert that doubled as breakfast, snack, and midnight treat in Black households throughout the 1960s. Bread was toasted until golden, spread thick with butter while still hot, then showered with cinnamon sugar that melted into fragrant sweetness. The butter had to be applied immediately, so it would soak into the warm bread and help the sugar mixture stick properly. Children stood by toasters waiting for their slices, the smell of cinnamon filling kitchens and signaling comfort. Mothers kept a jar of pre-mixed cinnamon sugar on the counter specifically for this purpose, the simple preparation requiring no thought or measurement. The toast could be cut into triangles for smaller children or served whole for those with bigger appetites, always delivering the same warm satisfaction.
Cheese wafers made with sharp cheddar and butter created crispy, salty crackers that children munched by the handful, their homemade quality far superior to anything store-bought could offer. Grandmothers would cream softened butter with finely shredded sharp cheddar cheese, then gradually add flour, salt, and cayenne pepper until the mixture formed a stiff dough. The dough was rolled into logs, wrapped in wax paper, and chilled until firm, then sliced into thin rounds and baked until golden brown and crispy. As they baked, the cheese melted into the butter and flour, creating crackers that were rich, savory, and addictively crunchy with just a hint of heat from the cayenne. In 1970s, Black households, Cheese wafers represented Southern tradition and hospitality, recipes that had been passed down through generations. Children loved cheese wafers because they tasted like cheesy potato chips but felt more sophisticated since they were homemade. Bread pudding with raisins was the warm, thrifty dessert that turned stale bread into something soft, sweet, and unforgettable. At every family reunion, grandmothers tore leftover bread into pieces, soaking them in a mixture of milk, eggs, sugar, and vanilla, until each piece absorbed the custard and softened into tender shapes waiting to bake. Raisins were sprinkled throughout, adding tiny bursts of sweetness that plumped up during baking, turning soft and juicy inside the warm pudding. As the dish baked, the top browned into a gentle crust, while the inside stayed soft, creamy, and full of flavor, filling the kitchen with a scent that wrapped around everyone like a blanket. Served warm from the oven, it tasted like comfort, simplicity, and the skill of elders who wasted nothing and created everything from what little they had. Bread pudding reminded families that desserts did not need to be expensive to feel like love.
And then there were the desserts that carried something heavier than sugar. Navy bean pie came out of the Nation of Islam in the 1930s and reached full stride by the 60s, when Elijah Muhammad's How to Eat to Live told followers to reject the foods of slavery, sweet potatoes, collards, pork, and build a new diet from navy beans, whole wheat, and discipline. The pie was custard style, made from cooked and mashed navy beans, blended smooth with eggs, sugar, butter, cinnamon, nutmeg, and vanilla, then poured into a crust and baked until it set like its sweet potato cousin. The men who sold it wore dark suits and bow ties, standing on city corners beside stacks of the Final Call newspaper, offering slices wrapped in wax paper. The taste was milder than sweet potato pie, less earthy, almost like a spiced vanilla custard. And most people couldn't identify the main ingredient unless you told them. Bean pie was an act of reinvention. Like the X that replaced a surname, it said, "We choose what feeds us now."
Persimmon bread was the taste of fall captured in a loaf, baked with the wild fruit that grew freely across southern woods. Ripe persimmons were mashed into a golden pulp, mixed with flour, eggs, and spice, and baked slow until the crust turned dark and fragrant. The bread came out moist and sticky, sweet without needing sugar. Families would gather fallen fruit from the ground, washing and sorting them carefully, their orange glow bright against rough hands. Baking it was a celebration of season and survival, a moment to enjoy the land's small gifts. The flavor was rich, tangy, and almost tropical, unlike anything store-bought. Each loaf told a story of time and patience, the waiting for fruit to ripen, the stirring of batter by hand, the sharing of slices by firelight. Persimmon bread was proof that sweetness could be found even when life itself felt bare. Chouflé pie was a molasses-rich dessert that entered African-American kitchens through Southern foodways and quickly became part of tradition. Its filling of molasses, brown sugar, and crumbs baked into a dense, sweet custard that carried both depth and energy. Molasses was affordable and widely available, making the pie a practical treat for families with limited means. The flavor was bold, not delicate, with a strong sweetness balanced by the crumb topping that baked into a crisp layer. Chouflé pie was often served in thick slices with coffee, making it a favorite for gatherings or late afternoon treats. Families appreciated it not only for its taste but also for its thrift, since molasses stretched further than refined sugar. Over time, it became less common as tastes shifted and store-bought desserts took over. Yet for those who remember it, chouflé pie is tied to memory and heritage, carrying the richness of the past in every bite. It remains one of those clever recipes that deserves to be remembered. Cottage pudding cake was a plain and simple dessert that carried warmth in its topping of fruit sauce. The cake itself was not elaborate, often little more than flour, sugar, and milk mixed into a soft sponge. What made it memorable was the hot fruit sauce poured over the slices just before serving, transforming something plain into something comforting. Families leaned on it for weekday dinners when money and energy were short, but dessert was still expected at the table. During the Civil Rights era, cottage pudding cake was a reminder that sweetness did not have to be expensive or complicated to matter. It was often made with whatever fruit was available, sometimes canned peaches or apples from home preserves, sometimes berries picked in season. Community cookbooks spread the recipe far and wide, making it a staple of potluck meals. Cottage pudding cake carried a sense of quiet pride, showing that even in modest homes, dessert could brighten the end of a long day. Maypop fruit mash turned the wild passion fruit of the American South into a rare dessert filled with tropical fragrance. Known as maypop for the sound of its hollow fruit when stepped on, this native vine produced aromatic yellow fruits that ripened in late summer. Enslaved foragers gathered the fruit, split the rinds, and scooped the bright pulp into a bowl with a drizzle of molasses or honey when such sweeteners were at hand. The result was a naturally tangy treat that needed no cooking and provided a burst of vitamins. The flavor, a cross between citrus and melon, delighted anyone lucky enough to taste it. Even after emancipation, rural families prized maypops for jellies and pies, and the plant remains a cherished wild edible across the Southeast. Maypop fruit mash preserves a memory of fleeting seasonal abundance and the creativity that transformed wild gifts into moments of celebration, proving that even in the harshest circumstances, people found ways to enjoy the bright, unique flavors offered freely by the natural world. Fried chicken gizzards were the appetizer that proved who knew their way around a skillet. Gizzards had to be cleaned right, seasoned well, and fried long enough to get tender. They were salty, chewy, crispy, and full of flavor that clung to your fingers. People ate them at church events, backyard gatherings, and fish fries where elders talked and kids played. They were cheap but felt like a treat made with care. Over time, they disappeared as fewer people cooked organ meats, but the memory of a cast iron skillet popping with hot oil still brings many right back home. Fried chicken wings with hot sauce and butter created sticky, finger-licking appetizers that had children lined up before dinner was announced, their crispy exteriors giving way to tender meat falling off the bone. Families prepared massive batches on Thanksgiving morning, seasoning them with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and paprika, before dredging in flour and dropping into cast iron skillets filled with bubbling hot oil. The wings fried until golden brown and crackling crisp, filling kitchens with aromas that drew everyone from every corner. Once drained and still hot, wings were tossed in melted butter and hot sauce, the heat always bold and spicy. In the 1970s, Black households, these wings represented abundance, showing guests everyone was welcome to eat their fill. Children loved them because they were handheld, required no utensils, and delivered maximum flavor with every bite.
Number 20, bread pudding. This was the dessert that said, nothing in this kitchen goes to waste. Black mothers saved stale bread all week. White bread, biscuits, cornbread, dinner rolls, whatever had gone dry by Friday got torn into pieces and soaked in a mixture of eggs, milk, sugar, vanilla, and cinnamon. Some added raisins, some added a spoonful of bourbon. The pan went into the oven and came out golden and puffed, soft in the center and crisp along the edges. A full pan cost almost nothing because the main ingredient was food that would have been thrown away. In a house where every dollar mattered, that was not just a dessert, that was engineering. Your grandmother did not call it bread pudding. She called it making do. Nothing died in those kitchens, not bread, not milk, not even the heel gone stale 3 days ago. Fried bread pudding squares took the waste nothing rule and turned it into a dessert so good that families saved bread on purpose. Day-old slices were soaked in custard of eggs, milk, sugar, vanilla, and cinnamon until swelled soft, then pressed into a pan and chilled firm. Cut thick and fried in hot lard, the outside developed a caramelized shell while the inside stayed creamy and custard rich. Church suppers across the South in the 1950s and 60s featured trays of these stacked and dusted with powdered sugar, sitting beside pound cakes and cobblers but disappearing first. The dish had roots in French and Caribbean, bread pudding traditions that arrived through New Orleans, then adapted into something fried, because in those kitchens, if it could be fried, it would. B. What other households called trash, these cooks called the starter dessert. But years before those skillet desserts reached the holiday table, something simpler was feeding families along the Texas-Louisiana border. The dough puffed the instant it hit the oil, ballooning into a hollow pillow so light it nearly floated. Molasses stack cake appeared at 1960s Black Christmas gatherings as towering testament to community cooperation, each thin layer contributed by different family members or neighbors who brought their portion to assemble. The layers were more like dense cookies, made with molasses, flour, and spices that created sturdy foundations for the apple filling spread between. Dried apples were stewed with molasses and cinnamon until they became thick paste that held layers together and softened them over days of aging. The assembled cake stood 6 to 12 layers high, wrapped in cloth, and stored where the flavors melded into something greater than individual parts. Making stack cake was a community event. Women gathered in kitchens, each contributing her signature layer while catching up on holiday news. Children watched and learned that some traditions require cooperation rather than individual achievement. By Christmas morning, the cake had transformed into a cohesive whole that tasted like concentrated holiday spirit. The lemon icebox pie sat on the second shelf of the refrigerator, covered with a dish towel, and you knew better than to touch it before Sunday dinner was over. This no-bake custard pie became a fixture in African-American kitchens once refrigerators became standard in the 1950s and 60s. The crust was crushed vanilla wafers pressed in with the heel of a hand, never graham crackers, because the wafer crust was softer and richer. The filling was 3 things: condensed milk, fresh lemon juice, and egg yolks whisked together until they thickened from the acid alone. She chilled it for 3 hours and finished it under the broiler with a meringue that browned at the peaks. She never measured the juice. You watched her hands and counted the lemons yourself, hoping to carry that knowledge forward. Most daughters got close. Nobody got it exactly right.
Vanilla wafer banana pudding cups were the dessert that appeared at church suppers, family reunions, and Sunday dinners without fail. Black mothers layered vanilla wafers with sliced bananas and instant vanilla pudding in small cups or glasses, creating individual servings that looked fancy but took almost no time. The pudding was mixed with cold milk and whisked until thick, then spooned over the wafers while children waited impatiently for their share. As the dessert sat, the wafers softened and absorbed the creamy pudding, creating a texture that melted on the tongue. Mothers made these in assembly line fashion, filling a dozen cups in minutes while dinner finished cooking. The combination of sweet vanilla, fresh banana, and tender cookie satisfied every craving without heating up the kitchen.
Blackberry molasses cobbler was a sticky, smoky dessert that belonged to cast-iron skillets and long summer nights. The berries were gathered wild from fence lines and hedges, their juice staining fingers and laughter alike. Mixed with thick, dark molasses and a handful of sugar, they turned into a bubbling, fragrant filling. The crust was poured over top, sometimes biscuit dough, sometimes batter, and baked until the edges burned just enough to taste like smoke. It was messy and imperfect, but that was part of its beauty. The syrup thickened into a glossy black glaze that clung to every bite, sweet with a whisper of bitterness. People spooned it hot into bowls, sometimes with milk or cream, but it never needed help. Blackberry molasses cobbler tasted like work and reward, like something earned under the sun. It was the dessert that reminded families that sweetness could survive the hardest days, that joy could bubble up even from thorns. Sheet cake was the reunion dessert designed to feed a crowd with soft, generous squares that children grabbed with both hands while adults reached for the corner pieces thick with frosting. The batter mixed into a smooth, dark pour that baked quickly in a large pan, rising into a tender cake that stayed moist even in summer heat. The warm cake received a melted chocolate frosting that spread easily over the top, settling into a shiny, smooth layer that cracked softly under the knife. Families loved it because one pan held enough for everyone, and because the flavor was rich, comforting, and impossible to resist. Chocolate sheet cake tasted like togetherness, celebration, and the joy of passing plates down long tables one piece after another.
But before box mixers took over the counter, some of the best cakes came from bottles. Coca-Cola cake was pure 1960s alchemy, a chocolate cake with actual Coca-Cola in the batter and the frosting, plus a handful of miniature marshmallows melted into the icing until it turned glossy and thick. The soda added moisture and a faint caramel tang that plain water or milk never could. You creamed butter and sugar, sifted cocoa and flour, then poured in the warm Coke and watched it fizz through the batter. The frosting was its own event: butter, cocoa, and more. Coca-Cola heated together, then poured over powdered sugar until it ran smooth. Chopped pecans went on top while the icing was still wet. The whole thing set up fudgy and dark, almost too rich, but never quite, and it traveled well, which mattered because this was the cake you carried to the church supper in a 9x13 pan covered with foil and a folded dish towel on top to keep it warm.
Cane syrup taffy pulls were moments of laughter wrapped in sticky sweetness, one of the few times children on plantations could forget the weight of their world. Syrup was boiled in iron pots until bubbling thick, then poured out to cool and pulled by hand into shiny golden ropes. It was hard work, but it was joy disguised as labor. The smell filled the air like music, burnt sugar and smoke mingling with the sound of laughter. Kids competed to stretch the taffy the longest, their hands gloved in butter to keep it from sticking. It was a shared delight in a life built on scarcity, a fleeting sweetness that belonged entirely to them. When the taffy hardened, it gleamed like amber glass, a memory you could taste. These pulls were more than candy. They were moments of freedom, soft and sweet, that stayed long after the sugar was gone. Black walnut cake had a deep, earthy taste that made it different from lighter, more common cakes. Black walnuts were not easy to come by, but they could be foraged in rural areas where families had long learned to make the most of nature's gifts. Cracking the shells and pulling out the nut meats was hard work, yet people did it because the result was worth it. This cake stood as a symbol of resourcefulness and care, since every slice carried hours of labor hidden inside. During the Civil Rights era, desserts like this often appeared at fellowship meals, with women proudly setting them down on long tables as proof of skill and dedication. A black walnut cake was never about extravagance. It was about showing love through the effort it took to create. For those who grew up tasting it, the flavor instantly recalled a time when people worked together to survive and celebrate despite limited means. Sweet sheep sorrel soup brought a welcome spark of bright flavor after months of heavy grains and salted meat scraps. This common wild plant, with its arrow-shaped leaves and natural lemony tang, grew freely in meadows and along woodland edges. Enslaved gatherers picked the young leaves early in spring, rinsed them well, and simmered them with water and a handful of onions or garlic if available. The result was a light, refreshing broth rich in vitamin C and a gentle tartness that awakened tired palates. African culinary traditions often prized sour greens, and this soup reflected that taste while also serving an important nutritional role in preventing scurvy. After emancipation, sheep sorrel remained a favorite wild green in many rural communities, used in teas and simple soups that celebrated the arrival of warmer weather. Today, foragers still seek it for its tangy bite and health benefits. Sheep sorrel soup stands as a quiet example of how careful observation of the land turned common weeds into an enduring part of Southern culinary heritage. Pickled pig feet bites were once a familiar sight at gatherings where everyone brought something from home, something that told a story about where they came from and what they valued. Families chilled the jars overnight until the meat firmed enough to slice into tangy, shiny pieces rich with gelatin. Served on toothpicks, they had a bright vinegar snap that made you reach for another even if you insisted you would not. They were cheap, filling, and deeply tied to Southern black foodways where nothing was wasted. Today, they almost never appear, but anyone who remembers them can still taste the history and thrift behind every bite. Cheese ball rolled in pecans sat proudly on serving platters surrounded by crackers, its cream cheese base mixed with cheddar, green onions, and seasonings before being shaped into a perfect sphere and coated with chopped pecans. Aunties would soften cream cheese and mix it with shredded sharp cheddar, finely chopped green onions, Worcestershire sauce, garlic powder, and sometimes hot sauce for complexity. The mixture was then shaped into a ball or log, wrapped in plastic, and chilled until firm enough to handle. Just before serving, the cheese ball was rolled in finely chopped pecans that created a crunchy, nutty coating contrasting beautifully with the creamy interior. In 1970s Black households, cheese balls represented sophistication and effort, centerpieces of appetizer spreads that showed guests the host had put thought into the gathering. Children loved them because they could spread the cheese themselves onto crackers, feeling grown-up and independent.
Number 25, sweet potato pie. This was not pumpkin pie with a different name. This was its own creation, built from a root vegetable that traveled from West Africa to Southern soil and ended up on every holiday table in every black household from Alabama to Chicago. Your mother peeled the sweet potatoes, boiled them soft, mashed them with butter and sugar and cinnamon and nutmeg, added eggs and evaporated milk, and poured it all into a crust she made from flour and lard. The whole pie cost about 40 cents in 1963. In some families, sweet potato pie showed up at Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, and every funeral in between. A woman in Memphis named Ora Lee Johnson made 11 of them every Thanksgiving for her church. She used to say that pumpkin pie was for people who did not know any better. That was tradition. Peanut butter was cheap, flour was cheaper, and when you rolled one inside the other with powdered sugar and dropped it into hot oil, you had something that tasted like it cost 10 times what it did. Fried peanut butter balls appeared in black households during the 1940s and 50s when George Washington Carver's work at Tuskegee Institute had pushed the peanut across the South, and jars sat in pantries from rural Georgia to Harlem. The balls were simple: peanut butter mixed stiff with powdered sugar, rolled small, dipped in light batter, and fried until the coating crackled. Inside, the peanut butter melted into something almost molten, sticking to the roof of your mouth. Church women packed them into tins for bake sales where a dozen sold for a dime. The trick was speed: 30 seconds too long and the filling turned bitter. Only the ones who had fried them 100 times got it right, and they never told you the secret was oil temperature, not the clock. Pralines connected 1960s black Christmas tables to deep Louisiana roots, those creamy pecan candies that shattered into sweetness with every bite. African-American mothers in New Orleans and throughout the Gulf Coast made pralines using recipes passed through generations from Creole grandmothers who had adapted French traditions with brown sugar and native pecans. The candy required precise temperature control, cooking the sugar mixture to exactly the right stage before beating until it turned from glossy to matte. Pour too early and the pralines stayed sticky forever. Wait too long and they turned grainy and hard. Children learned to recognize the ready moment by the way mixture sheeted off the spoon, knowledge transferred through watching rather than reading. Pralines were packed into decorative boxes for Christmas gifts, each piece representing skill that store-bought candy could never match. The creamy texture against toasted pecans created flavor combinations that defined Gulf Coast Christmas celebrations. The peanut butter icebox pie was the dessert that required a refrigerator and not much else. and once families in Virginia and the Carolinas had that appliance, it became the summer offering that emptied before the others were half gone. George Washington Carver's research at Tuskegee in the early 20th century helped establish peanut butter as a pantry staple in African American kitchens across the South. The filling was cream cheese, beaten smooth, stirred through with peanut butter and powdered sugar, then lightened with whipped topping until the mixture could hold its own weight. It went into a vanilla wafer crust and chilled for 4 hours minimum. The pie sliced clean and cold without ever needing the oven on a 90-degree July day, which was the entire point. She kept it covered on the middle shelf. If you got up early enough on a Sunday morning, you could take a slice before anyone came downstairs. The crumbs on the counter gave you away every single time.
Dark fruitcake was the boozy, dense Christmas cake that African American families aged for weeks before the holidays, feeding it bourbon until it became almost intoxicating. Unlike the reviled commercial fruitcakes, homemade versions were rich with candied fruits, nuts, and enough alcohol to preserve them for months. Black families began preparation in November, soaking dried fruits in bourbon or rum until they plumped with spirits. The batter was heavy with molasses and dark brown sugar, baked low and slow until a toothpick came out clean, but the cake remained moist. Once cooled, the cake was wrapped in cheesecloth, doused with more bourbon, and stored in tins where it aged into something extraordinary. Slices were cut thin because the flavor was so concentrated, each bite delivering fruit, spice, and warmth. Dark fruitcake was often served with hard sauce or simply enjoyed with coffee. This cake was patience made edible, proof that some pleasures were worth waiting for.
Peanut butter balls were rolled by hand at kitchen tables where children helped shape the sticky mixture into bite-sized treats. Mothers mixed peanut butter with powdered sugar and a little butter until the dough held together, then let small hands roll it into balls that went straight into waiting mouths. The recipe required no cooking, no baking, and no special equipment beyond a mixing bowl and willing fingers. Some versions were rolled in crushed graham crackers, coconut, or cocoa powder for variety, each family developing their own signature style. The balls could be made ahead and stored in the refrigerator, providing grab-and-go sweetness throughout the week. Children learned to make these themselves, their first cooking lesson being something sweet and nearly impossible to mess up.
Lemon chess pie brought bright citrus sunshine to African American Christmas tables, cutting through holiday richness with its tangy sweetness. The filling combined butter, sugar, eggs, and fresh lemon juice with cornmeal that gave it distinctive texture. As the pie baked, the top formed a thin, crackled crust, while the interior stayed creamy and smooth. The lemon flavor was assertive but balanced, with cornmeal adding subtle graininess that set it apart from lemon meringue. Chess pie had deep southern roots that African American cooks claimed and perfected, adding lemon when other citrus was scarce. The pie was served at room temperature, its bright yellow filling visible against flaky crust. Families made both plain chess and lemon versions, offering guests variety at dessert tables. This pie required careful attention to filling consistency. Lemon chess pie has become rare as chess pies faded from popularity.
Hummingbird cake was the moist, fruit-filled reunion dessert that felt tropical, even under heavy summer heat, blending bananas, pineapple, and chopped nuts into a batter that baked into tender, fragrant layers. The cake came out soft, dense, and sweet with a texture that felt almost like banana bread lifted into a celebration cake. Once cooled, it was frosted with creamy, tangy icing that balanced the richness and made every slice feel decadent. Families loved hummingbird cake because it stayed moist for days, fed many people, and traveled well across long reunion tables. Its flavors were bright, comforting, and unmistakable, making it one of the first cakes to disappear. Whenever dessert plates were passed around, hummingbird cake tasted like sunshine hospitality and the joyful abundance that defined reunion gatherings.
pig picking cake got its name from North Carolina barbecue gatherings where a whole hog roasted over coals and the dessert had to hold its own against the smoke. Yellow cake mix, mandarin oranges with the juice, eggs and oil beaten together and baked in layers. The filling was crushed pineapple folded into instant vanilla pudding and Cool Whip, cold, sweet, impossibly light against the dense cake. The fruit kept everything moist for days, which mattered because this cake traveled. It rode in back seats to church picnics, reunions, and 4th of July cookouts wrapped in foil with a name and marker on the side so the dish came back to the right woman. There was always an argument about whose was best, and the argument was never settled because settling it would have ended the tradition of everyone bringing one.
Vinegar cobbler was born out of clever desperation, a pie made without fruit when fruit was nowhere to be found. During lean times, cooks discovered that a few spoonfuls of vinegar could mimic the tang of apples or berries when mixed with sugar and spice. The filling bubbled golden beneath a biscuit crust, the scent of caramel and acid mingling in the air. It wasn't fancy, but it felt like luxury to those who made it. Every bite was tart, sweet, and full of resilience, a dessert that turned an empty pantry into abundance. The vinegar balanced the sweetness perfectly, fooling even those who didn't know the secret. For families scraping by, this dish was proof that imagination could be as nourishing as food itself. Vinegar cobbler might have vanished from modern tables, but in its time, it was a triumph of spirit baked into a humble pie dish. Sorrel jelly cakes were small sponge cakes flavored with hibiscus flowers, better known as sorrel in Caribbean communities, and their bright, tangy taste carried migration stories with them. Families who moved from the islands into American cities brought these recipes and adapted them to local kitchens. The flavor was unlike other cakes of the time, floral and tart, with a rich color that made them stand out on crowded dessert tables. During the Civil Rights era, these cakes were a symbol of cultural blending, representing how immigrant traditions merged with African American foodways. They appeared at church socials where Caribbean and Southern families cooked side by side, sharing food that carried memory and identity. For many children, sorrel jelly cakes were their first taste of a dessert tied to roots outside the South, connecting them to wider traditions of resilience. The cakes showed that flavor and culture could not be erased, even in times of struggle. They were sweet, colorful reminders that migration added strength and diversity to the community table. Butterscotch pudding was the kind of dessert that required both patience and stirring. Mama would stand at the stove with a wooden spoon, whisking milk, butter, and brown sugar until it thickened to a glossy gold. The scent of caramel filled the kitchen, warm and cozy as a quilt. When it was ready, she poured it into glass bowls or jelly jars to cool, each portion gleaming like sunshine. Served chilled or just barely warm, it slid smooth on the tongue, sweet but never too much. The flavor was deep, buttery, and old-fashioned. Simple enough for any night, but special enough for Sunday. A sprinkle of sugar on top gave it a delicate crust, the perfect finish to a meal that lingered in memory. Butterscotch pudding proved that comfort could come from the simplest ingredients if made with care. It was home in spoonful form, creamy, golden, and unforgettable. Salmon croquette balls were the kind of appetizer families relied on when they needed something hearty and affordable. Canned salmon was already a weeknight staple, but rolling it into tiny balls and frying them until crisp turned ordinary ingredients into something festive. They came out golden on the outside and tender inside, seasoned simply but perfectly. Grandmothers filled trays with them, and they vanished fast because they were easy to grab and full of flavor. Over the years, they faded from party menus, but for those who remember them, the taste still feels warm, comforting, and filled with love. Bacon-wrapped water chestnuts delivered crispy, salty, and slightly sweet bites that children fought over despite not knowing exactly what water chestnuts were, the bacon exterior and crunchy interior creating mysterious but delicious combinations. Aunties would drain cans of whole water chestnuts, wrapping each one with half a strip of bacon and securing it with toothpicks before arranging them on baking sheets. Before baking, each bundle was brushed with a mixture of brown sugar and soy sauce that caramelized during cooking, creating a sweet salty glaze that coated the bacon. The water chestnuts roasted until the bacon was crispy and rendered, the fat dripping away while the sugar coating turned golden brown and slightly sticky. In Black households during the 1970s, bacon-wrapped water chestnuts represented sophistication borrowed from magazines, recipes that seemed fancy but remained simple for home cooks. Children loved them because bacon made everything better.
Number 16, fried apple pies. Your mother made these on a Saturday morning when the apples had gone soft and the children were restless. She peeled them, sliced them thin, cooked them down with sugar and cinnamon until they turned into a thick filling. Then she rolled out biscuit dough, cut it into circles, spooned the filling inside, folded them in half, crimped the edges with a fork, and fried them until both sides were golden brown. They came out the size of your hand and hot enough to burn your tongue. Fried pies were a tradition that Black families brought north during the Great Migration. Women in Detroit, Chicago, and Cleveland made them the same way their mothers had made them in Alabama and Mississippi. They did not need an oven. They needed a skillet, some dough, and a few soft apples that nobody else wanted. That was enough. In the hills of rural Alabama and Georgia, fall meant one thing before it meant anything else: persimmons. Wild persimmon trees grew along fence lines and at the edges of fields, and the women who knew the land knew exactly when the fruit was ready, soft enough to split in your hand, sweet enough to eat raw, but best when cooked down into a thick pulp and folded into fried dumplings. The pulp was mixed with flour, sugar, cinnamon, and a pinch of baking soda, then dropped by the spoonful into hot lard, where each dumpling puffed slightly and turned deep amber at the edges. The taste was unlike any other fruit, earthy, almost honey-like, with a sweetness that clung to the back of your throat. You could not buy persimmons at the store. You had to know where the trees grew and wait for the first frost to soften them, because an unripe persimmon would pucker your mouth shut. That knowledge passed through generations of women who walked the same paths every October. When they stopped walking, the trees kept fruiting, but nobody came to pick. Lane cake carried Alabama heritage into 1960s Black Christmas celebrations, a white layer cake filled with bourbon-soaked raisins, pecans, and coconut that made adults smile knowingly while children enjoyed the sweetness. The filling was cooked slowly, eggs and sugar combined with butter until thick, then studded with dried fruits and nuts plumped in whiskey overnight. Some mothers used homemade fruit wine when bourbon was unavailable, achieving similar depth with whatever spirits the household kept. The cake layers themselves were tender and pale, made with egg whites only, providing neutral canvas for the rich filling. Lane cake was considered fancy enough for company, but affordable enough for families who saved throughout the year for Christmas splurges. The bourbon flavor mellowed as the cake aged, making it better on Christmas Day than when first assembled. Mothers who made exceptional Lane cake earned reputations that followed them through decades of church gatherings and family reunions. Bread pudding was the proof that a kitchen wasted nothing, that yesterday's bread left out overnight could become today's dessert if the right hands were on it. In African American households through the 1940s and 50s, bread pudding began with whatever had gone stale, leftover biscuits, day-old cornbread, white bread dried out overnight, the pieces soaked in a custard of eggs, milk, sugar, and vanilla until each one had absorbed as much, liquid as it could hold, then baked until the top crisp gold and the inside stayed moist and soft. But the whiskey sauce was what made it unforgettable. Butter, powdered sugar, an egg yolk, and a generous pour of bourbon, heated and stirred until it thickened and turned pale gold and smelled like something meant for grown-ups. She poured it warm over each serving. The sauce soaked into the crust and pooled in the valleys, and the combination of warm pudding and that bourbon sweetness was the kind of thing you remembered for years.
Gingerbread with lemon sauce was the Christmas dessert that balanced warm spices with bright citrus across African American holiday tables. The gingerbread itself was dense and dark, made with molasses that gave it both color and that distinctive bittersweet depth. Ginger, cinnamon, and cloves filled kitchens with the smell of the season as the bread baked to perfection. But the revelation was the lemon sauce. Butter, sugar, and fresh lemon juice cooked into a pourable glaze that cut through the richness like sunshine breaking through clouds. Black families served the gingerbread warm, with the cool lemon sauce puddling around each slice. Children who thought they didn't like gingerbread changed their minds when the lemon entered the picture. The contrast of dark and light, warm and cool, spicy and tart, made this dessert unforgettable. Gingerbread with lemon sauce has largely vanished from modern tables, replaced by simpler sweets that lack its sophisticated balance.
Saltine toffee was the addictive treat that Black mothers discovered could be made in minutes with crackers, butter, and brown sugar. Saltines were lined up on a baking sheet, covered with melted butter and brown sugar mixture, then topped with chocolate chips that melted from residual heat. The result was crunchy, salty sweet candy that disappeared as fast as mothers could make it, children sneaking pieces before they fully cooled. The recipe required only pantry staples and transformed ordinary crackers into something that tasted like expensive confection. Mothers made batches during holidays, storing them in tins where they rarely lasted more than a day. The combination of salt, butter, sugar, and chocolate hit every craving at once, proving fancy ingredients were never necessary for great dessert.
Buttermilk pralines were African-American Christmas candy that captured New Orleans sophistication using ingredients common in Southern pantries. The candy was made by cooking sugar, butter, and buttermilk until reaching soft ball stage, then beating in pecans and vanilla before dropping onto wax paper. Buttermilk gave these pralines tangier, more complex flavor than versions made with cream, while sugar caramelized into something approaching butterscotch. Grandmothers tested temperature by dropping bits into cold water, knowing when candy reached proper stage through years of practice. The pralines spread into irregular rounds as they cooled, surfaces matte, interiors creamy and studded with nuts. Children watched candy making with fascination, waiting to scrape the pot. Buttermilk pralines were packaged in tins, given as gifts to neighbors and church members. This candy has faded as candy thermometers replaced intuition, and store-bought pralines became easier than mastering temperamental cooking.
Sorghum syrup bread was a wartime and Depression-era answer to expensive refined sugar. Sorghum, a tall grass grown widely in the South, was boiled down into a thick, dark syrup that tasted earthy and sweet. Families would use it in place of sugar, mixing it into simple bread doughs to stretch rations and still enjoy something satisfying. Sorghum syrup bread was hearty, with a flavor that carried a touch of bitterness, but warmed the spirit. Children often slathered slices with butter or drippings, while adults enjoyed it with strong coffee. It was a farm food at its core, tied directly to the fields where sorghum stalks grew. Sorghum bread meant that no one had to give up sweetness completely even when sugar prices were too high or stores ran out. This loaf was practical, easy to make at home, and deeply tied to Southern soil. After times of scarcity passed, sorghum faded, but the memory of that dark bread stayed.
The sticky sweet smell of popcorn balls carried from the kitchen to every room in the house, and that was how you knew something was happening. A church bazaar to prep for, a Halloween treat to bag, or just a Saturday when your mother felt like making something with her hands. Corn syrup, sugar, butter, and a little vinegar went into a saucepan and boiled until a drop in cold water cracked between your teeth. That hot syrup got poured over a bowl of freshly popped stovetop corn, and you shaped the balls fast, hands greased with butter to keep the molten sugar from welding to your skin. Kids stood in line, fingers slick, pulling at the warm mass and pressing it round. Some mothers added food coloring, red for Christmas, orange for Halloween. Some stirred in peanuts or candy corn. Each ball got wrapped in wax paper, twisted at the ends, lined up on the counter like little gifts that cost nothing and meant everything.
Mayhaw jelly cake was a masterpiece of foraged sweetness, made with berries that grew wild in southern thickets. The tiny red mayhaws were gathered by hand, simmered into a tart jelly with a color as deep as ruby glass. That jelly was spread between layers of yellow cake, each one tender and fragrant with butter. The flavor was bright and tangy, a whisper of spring caught inside a winter celebration. For rural families, this cake was pride-made edible. It showed not only skill, but the ability to turn wild fruit into beauty. Every slice shimmered with effort, patience, and the joy of harvest remembered. Women and children would wade into brambles to gather the fruit, their fingers stained red as proof of the labor behind the sweetness. The jelly set slowly on the stove, filling the air with perfume and promise. The Mayhaw jelly cake may have faded from tables, but its story remains. A reminder that sweetness often grows in the wild and must be found, not bought. Grits with butter and cheese served as a sustaining breakfast for activists and travelers heading out before sunrise to meetings, protests, or voter registration drives. Stone-ground corn simmered slowly in salted water until it thickened to a creamy consistency, then was enriched with a generous pat of butter and a handful of sharp cheese. The warm, hearty dish provided energy for long hours of work and carried the unmistakable flavor of Southern tradition. Church kitchens often kept large pots ready, ladling portions into bowls for anyone in need of a quick yet filling meal. The gentle comfort of grits soothed nerves and stomachs alike, offering a steady start to days filled with both hope and tension. Children and adults found reassurance in its familiar taste, a link to home even when traveling far from family. Grits with butter and cheese stands as a simple but powerful reminder that the movement for civil rights was nourished by the steadfast hands of those who cooked with love and quiet determination. Buttermilk cornbread baked in cast iron anchored countless suppers with its golden crust and tangy bite. The heavy skillet, seasoned from years of use, gave the bread a flavor impossible to match in a modern pan. Families stirred cornmeal with fresh buttermilk, a little lard, and a pinch of salt, then listened for the satisfying hiss as the batter hit hot iron. The result was a loaf both crisp at the edges and tender inside, perfect for soaking up pot liquor from simmered greens or for eating plain with a drizzle of cane syrup. Grandmothers often taught their grandchildren to test the heat of the skillet by flicking in a few drops of water, a small ritual that connected generations. On Sundays after church, the scent of baking cornbread drifted through neighborhoods, promising a meal that united family and friends. Today, prepackaged mixes and quick breads have replaced the slow, careful method that once defined African American kitchens, and the art of true cast-iron cornbread grows rarer with each passing year. Hot water cornbread fritters were small rounds of golden comfort made from cornmeal, salt, boiling water, and a cook's instinct. They hit the skillet with a soft sizzle, crisping on the outside while staying warm and tender inside. People served them with honey butter, molasses, or nothing at all because the flavor stood strong on its own. They showed up at church gatherings and holiday tables, disappearing faster than anyone expected. Over time, they faded as boxed mixes replaced homemade doughs. But one bite can still bring back porch mornings, warm kitchens, and elders humming as they cooked. Shrimp cocktail served in small cups with tangy cocktail sauce was elegant finger food that made children feel sophisticated. The cold, tender shrimp dipped in spicy sweet sauce, creating flavors that seemed fancy. Mothers would boil shrimp in seasoned water with Old Bay seasoning, lemon, and bay leaves until they turned pink and curled, then plunge them into ice water to stop the cooking. Once chilled, the shrimp were peeled and deveined, their tails left on for easy handling, then arranged around small cups filled with cocktail sauce made from ketchup, horseradish, lemon juice, and Worcestershire sauce. The cocktail sauce had a sharp, tangy kick that balanced the shrimp's natural sweetness, creating combinations that felt restaurant quality. In the 1970s, Black households, shrimp cocktail represented luxury and celebration, an appetizer that elevated holiday gatherings. Children loved shrimp cocktail because they could hold the shrimp by the tail and dip them like French fries.
Here are 100 forgotten 1960s desserts that Black families loved, and every single one of them needs a place on somebody's table again. 100 recipes that lived in somebody's hands, not in a cookbook. Flour, butter, sugar, a little vanilla, and the kind of patience nobody seems to have time for anymore. If any of these brought back a memory, share this video with somebody who sat at that table with you. And if you have not already, subscribe so you do not miss the next one.